Hi everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Curtis. My name is Daniel Albu, and today on our show we have legendary artist Bill Tiller. You may know Bill from games like The Curse of Monkey Island, The Dig, and The Vampyre Story, but he also worked on many other, less-known adventure games. So sit back and enjoy my longest conversation yet, my conversation with Bill Tiller. Bill Tiller, welcome to Conversations with Curtis.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You know, while preparing for this interview, I've noticed that I have tons of questions for you. So what I usually do in this case is I contact my future guest and ask him or her if they are fine with me asking this amount of questions or if they have a time limit on the conversation. And according to their answer, I revised my list of questions. So I did the same with you.
Okay.
And I was pleasantly surprised to hear that you're totally fine with having a long conversation.
Yeah. I can talk all day. Yeah, no problem. And I
So
tend to, as I warned you, I tend to talk a lot. So you may have to edit this, and hopefully I'm not boring anybody at home.
No,
So
I'm not editing anything. Everything
okay.
will remain in this conversation as is. So, viewers, be advised, this might be my longest conversation yet.
Okay.
Okay, let's
Try
get to
not to
it.
bore you. We'll try not to bore you.
Okay, let's get to it. By
Sure.
starting at the beginning. How did you get into art?
Kind of always have. Even when I was like 3 or 4 years old, my parents would constantly give me art supplies, and me and my sister were big into art, and we kind of compete with each other about who was the better artist, and friendly. Yeah, I just remember I would draw, stuff on command. My dad was all excited about the things I could draw, and he'd say, "Hey, draw this," and I'd draw that, and he'd say, "Oh, look at this," and he'd put it up, and I'd draw a picture of my cousin. And one thing that was funny about the drawing of the picture of my cousin that my dad pointed out was that usually when a little kid draws, they draw the kid walking sideways, silhouette view. But I was drawing him actually in perspective as he was coming toward me, and he thought that was pretty cool. And later I realized, yeah, that's not it's not something you normally see. I mean, it's pretty simple or so forth, but I was trying to draw exactly what I was looking at rather than a representation. So yeah, that was like the first time I drew art. I remember drawing my little baby cousin walking right at me in perspective. Um, so what other art? I just kind of always had drawn. My mom had two rules. One was, or when it came to buying things, she said, she's not going to buy a lot of toys and a lot of games and that sort of stuff. But if we ever wanted art supplies, she would always buy art supplies. There was no budget for that. And same thing with books. She said, if we want any books, she'll buy any books. So I always get, in school, they had these little paper catalogs of books so you could order endless amount of books. And I'd always come home with a stack, and my teachers are like, you read all these? And I'm like, yeah, I totally read all these books. So I'm grateful for my mom for that, and we got tons of art supplies. Me and my sister were always down in the basement drawing stuff or building stuff and doing creative stuff. And in the background, there was always like some sort of television program on that we wouldn't really pay attention to, but we would, just keep it in the background. And it was always like some sort of monster movie or some old-fashioned classic movie or something, because that's all that was on back in the 70s. So yeah, I just kind of did that a lot as a kid, and people would ask me to draw stuff for them when I was in grade school, so I would do that a lot. But I was really big into, Star Trek and anything sci-fi and Close Encounters and Star Wars. So I would draw that constantly too. And Space 99, Space 1999. I don't know if you ever remember that old show, but I love that show, and I would draw that Space Eagle all the time. So yeah, that's kind of what I did, and I just did it more and more. Then I got into Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and animation. I mean, I was always big in animation. My grandfather would always take me to Disney movies, endless amount of Disney movies. When there's a Disney movie out, we go see it and see it a bunch of times. So, Jungle Book and Bambi, and Peter Pan, those are really big influences on me. So I really loved, looking at all those Disney movies and the backgrounds. I really love the backgrounds of the Disney movies. And that was kind of when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I want to go work for Disney and I want to paint backgrounds for animated movies. and I pretty much wanted to do that up until junior high school. Um, but then I got into other things, like I was interested in filmmaking and animation and that sort of stuff. So I went to college. I ended up going to California Institute of the Arts for animation, and I didn't really do that much background work, but I did a lot of character animation work, paper, where you flip the pages and draw and take it to the test machine. And I wasn't the best animator. I was pretty good animator when it comes to physical action, but I wasn't like the greatest cartoonist in the world because, like I said, I mostly focused on backgrounds and spaceships and that sort of stuff, physical things. But what's great about that is all my teachers were actual Disney animators and Disney story artists, so got pretty good education that way. And then the students were so talented. They blew me away. I mean, I was used to winning awards for my art in my high school and my junior high school, and I was like, cool, I'm a pretty badass artist. But when I got to CalArts, I was like, oh my God, I suck. I really suck. I'm gonna have to up my game big time. And the other students were nice about it, but I could tell they were like, yeah, this guy's not going to do anything. He's not going to be an animator. Um, you know, and I was like, yeah, you're right. I'm not going to go work for Disney. You guys are so good. Um, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from the teachers. Some of them are fairly famous now. Joe Ranft, unfortunately, he passed away, but he was one of my teachers. And Mike Giamo, he was like a color teacher and a character design teacher, and he did Frozen. Frozen was his big art direction thing, and my animation teacher was Chris Buck, the guy who did Frozen. Um, so they were all really, really, really good, and I learned a ton from them. And this, like I said, I had to really up my game, so I didn't feel embarrassed whenever I put an assignment on the wall. So most of the time I did, but every once in a while. But that's also
Wait,
when I really got
you
into.
had to put your assignments on the wall?
Yeah, at the at the beginning of class, so everybody could look at it. So you had to make sure you didn't completely suck. So I was always in the probably bottom third of the class. I wasn't the worst, but nowhere near the best. Some of the animators, their stuff was really good. Would be like Pete Docter, who's now head of Pixar, and Ashley Brannon, who helped direct, Toy Story 2, and just a lot of great animators. Micah Chuela, who helped co-direct was it Coraline, and helped with Nightmare Before Christmas as a storyboard artist. Their stuff was the best. Their stuff was like I could learn so much just by looking at their stuff. And then they had guest teachers come in too, like John Lasseter before Pixar started. He would come in and give a class, and Glenn Keane, and oh God, who did Ratatouille? I forget his name already. I can't believe it. I don't know. He came and talked too. He was talking about this new show that it was excited on Fox called The Simpsons. We never heard of it. I never heard of it before, but he wanted people to come and work on The Simpsons. I'm like, okay, looks cool, I guess, but it wasn't something I was that interested in. Um, so yeah, and before that, I really was into the computer. Back in 1982, we got a Apple II Plus, and they had two modes of graphics. One was like 32 pixels tall, and they were big blocks, and maybe 40 wide or something like that. And then they had another version which was like 100 pixels up and 150 wide, and they had a limited number of colors. So I started drawing on that, and we couldn't really draw. We had to use paddles. So it's like a Etch a Sketch. So I could learn how to draw on the computer with an Etch a Sketch, and so that was kind of fun. But then I figured out what I could do is I could draw on a graph paper, and I could just, you know, make jaggy lines with whatever I drew, and then I could program in each line. So I'd actually program in, start X, Y over here and draw this, and it would draw a picture. And then I figured out how to make it move. So, and we played a few video games. I did have some LucasArts games. I had Pegasus and Rescue on Fractalus. So those were my first two LucasArts games. I didn't play them a ton, but it got me into doing art on the computer. And then the Amigas came out, and I was like blown away by the Amigas. I was like, wow, 64 colors, holy crap! 200 pixels vertically, or whatever the mode that was in. And yeah, I was playing with the Amiga a lot at the junior college because I couldn't afford one. So I took a junior college, summer class and learned how to draw using D-Paint. If you ever heard of D-Paint, it was kind of what everybody
Yeah,
used
Deluxe
back in
Paint. All of LucasArts
Deluxe Paint.
artists work with Deluxe Paint.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that helped me get the job at LucasArts. So because I played with Deluxe Paint a ton, and then when I went to CalArts, they finally brought in a ton of Amigas too, and I learned Video Toaster, if you remember that, and I really love Video Toaster because then the graphics were much higher and the more colors you had. But I did a lot of animation on D-Paint, even though most of my animators are still doing paper. Most of the students are doing paper. I was like, I better go to my lane. My lane is computer art, so drawing, illustration on computer art. So I better go into my lane, and I did the paper stuff, but I wasn't that good at it. But when I went into the D-Paint, I figured out how to use the tools to do animation really quickly, a lot faster than the paper animators. So the paper animators, when you draw animation, you have to kind of sketch it out first with these simple shapes, and you have to kind of draw it out and kind of get the movement right, and it's really, really rough. It's really rough, and you're usually using simple shapes like circles and ovals and tubes and that sort of thing to get the arms and legs, and then you would put in the details. But with D-Paint, I could just stamp a circle. Boom, I didn't have to draw and stamp it, and then I'd hit the frame, stamp, 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 stamp. Boom, bouncing ball. 5 seconds. If you had to do that with paper, it would take you probably 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So my teachers were impressed with the speed of the computer, and my mentor, who was in charge of the department, Bob Winkust, he's like, yeah, that's the future, guys. Computers, learn them. And a lot of the guys were very traditional. They liked Don Bluth, they liked Warner Brothers, they liked traditional Disney. They were like, I'm not having any of that. No, no, no. So while they're out drawing with their, animation pads, the little disc and so forth, I was in the Amiga lab, whipping out little animations, just fun stuff. The great thing about how fast it was is that I could come up. I always come up with a lot of ideas. I think I have ADHD, so I always come up with a ton of ideas. So I could kind of work out my ideas pretty quickly. And if I had an idea for a short story, or a short animation, I would just whip it out real quick on D-Paint and Deluxe Paint. So I ended up having a lot of Deluxe Paint animation, D-Paint animation on my portfolio, which is what helped me get my job at LucasArts. Because most people had really good portfolios, and I had a lot of computer stuff. And the head of LucasArts art department came down to LucasArts during what they called the producer show. And the producer show was the end of the year where they show animators show off their films to producers from all these different studios, and then the studios would have this portfolio day, and you'd go to different rooms, and they'd have the guy from Disney, the guy from Bluth, the guy from Warner Brothers, the guy from the Simpsons, and you'd sign up your time and you would show your portfolio. So I had my stuff up on the wall, and Colette Michaud of LucasArts. I'm not. She's gonna kill me. I'm pronouncing her name wrong. I know it. All right, forgive me, Colette, if you see this. Um, she came by and saw my stuff, all computer, printouts, and then she saw my animation, and she was all excited, and she wanted me to come up and take a test. And that's kind of how I got the job. It was a little weird because my school is down in LA, and LucasArts up in San Francisco, San Rafael area, and so I went all the way up there, stayed with my dad because he lives up there, and it was like a 2-day test. I was like, oh, they're gonna give me a test, okay. And I didn't really have an interview at all either. It wasn't like a traditional company interview. So I thought, okay, that's fine. I'll do an animation test. And 2 days, that's kind of a long time. It was funny
Wait,
because
what did they need 2 days for? You come in the first day for how many hours?
it's not even the first day. This was just an interview. If I didn't pass the test, they were gonna not give me the job. So yeah, so there was a guy there, Sean Turner, who used to work at ILM, but ILM does a lot of layoffs. They bring people in and then they lay them off. So if there's a movie like The Abyss, they brought people in, work on it, and they're gone. If it's Death Becomes Her, they bring in a lot of people and then they lay them off. So he was getting sick of that, so he got a job at LucasArts, and he was like the head of animation at LucasArts, and he gave me the test. So I'm sitting in a room all by myself, and so it was cool. LucasArts, when I was there, was pretty cool because it was part of ILM. So ILM had a bunch of buildings in this canal district. They just looked like ugly warehouses, in this kind of semi-industrial neighborhood. But once you get inside, boom, it suddenly becomes Star Wars world. There's props and paintings and everything's nicely done. You know how George Lucas overspends on making things look nice. If you've ever been to the ranch, or seen any of the stuff like at the Presidio, it's just overly nice. But on the outside, they kind of disguised it and made it look like it was like some ugly warehouse. Um, and they even changed the front of ILM. Didn't say ILM, it said Kerner Optical, because the street was named Kerner, and that's where you got the Colonel Kerner, Commander Kerner,
Hmm.
Indiana Jones, Fate of Atlantis. Somebody's named Kerner, I think the
Oh,
villain.
right, Kerner.
It's named after the street.
Hmm.
The LucasArts was on. So we had a couple buildings just on the periphery of ILM, and so when I first came up, I was like, "Oh, what the hell? This building's freaking ugly." But when I came in to what the artists were, the B building area, it was like really nice. It was like it was very industrial kind of looking, but nicely painted, moody. There was mood light everywhere, and there was like paintings from Return of the Jedi, matte paintings and props and R2D2 and just stuff hanging off the wall. I was like, oh man, this is cool. As a Star Wars fan, I was just blown away. And all the people had cool desks and neat stuff on it. And it wasn't like a cubicle. You think of a cubicle, typical office where there's tons of ugly lighting and everything's lined up and everything's got a cubicle. No, this was like open space. Everything was organic. It was kind of like when I was at CalArts. At CalArts, we'd have our own desk, and a lot of us just decided to be kind of creative with it. Put posters here and there, and curtains to hang over, and mood lighting, and all sorts of stuff just to make it fun, and beanbag chairs, and lava lamps, and just animations, cutouts, and so forth, and make it really organic and fun. And LucasArts was like the B building anyway. B building is the art building. So I was all excited. I thought that was really cool. I'm a dumbass. I've never done an interview before for any major company, and I showed up in a suit and tie. It was a cool suit and tie. I had a really cool tie that was kind of Art Deco, and I had some, kind of artsy colors on. And back then my hair was like super long, and it was in a ponytail, and I had, put it in a ponytail so I didn't want to look too much like a hippie. And I come in and
So
everybody's
you
wearing
suited up to
shorts.
interview for a gaming company.
Yeah, absolutely. At the time, I didn't know anything about gaming. I just knew about animation at that time. I only knew about, Disney films and Bluth and Simpsons, and that sort of stuff. So I didn't know what to wear. So yeah, when Colette opened the door and let me in, she saw me in a suit and tie. I think she's like, yeah, you didn't. Don't worry about it. Tomorrow you can show up in whatever the hell you want. So yeah, I came in and they were working on Day of the Tentacle, and I got to meet some people as I walked through. I met Larry Ahern. I got to hang out with Kyle Balda, who was an animator that I knew at CalArts, so we knew each other. Um, and meet Anson Jew.
Kyle Balda
What
was an
else?
intern at the time, right?
Yeah, I think so. Was he an intern? I know he got paid, and he was working on Day of the Tentacle. I thought he was an employee, but maybe you're right. Maybe he was just an intern. I don't know.
I'm trying to get Kyle for a conversation in the future, and I know that he's currently directing the Minions sequels
Oh,
and the
okay.
movies.
Yeah,
And back then, he worked on the intro for Day of the Tentacle.
yeah, that's what he was working on when I got there. So I could see what everybody was working on. So that was kind of cool. They didn't have me sign an NDA either, so that was kind of weird. I guess NDAs didn't really exist back then, or there wasn't that big of a deal. Um, so yeah, I saw that was the big game that everybody was working on, this Day of the Tentacle, and there was the guys working on the Super Star Wars stuff. There was the Nintendo guys. Rebel Assault hadn't started yet, and I heard about this game called X-Wing they were working on right after Swaddle: Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe had just come out, or had come out right around then. Um, so I was like, "Well, where's Ron Gilbert?" And they're like, "Ron Gilbert quit." I'm like, "Oh man, I wanted to meet Ron Gilbert because So I knew I had the interview coming up, and I hadn't played a LucasArts game. I hadn't played any games in 4 years. 4 years was just pure working on animation. I did a little short film. I tried making another live action film. I did a bunch of little short deep paint anime. I was just busy, socializing, networking, and working. So I hadn't got a chance to play any games. I used to play them all the time on my Apple II Plus. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm graduated now. I got a month before this interview. Let's get some LucasArts games. I go to the local store and I'm like, hey, you got that Fate of Atlantis game? I saw a poster for it, and they're like, nah, it's not out yet. It's late. I'm like, God damn it. Well, is there any other LucasArts games? And they're like, well, we got this Monkey Island 2. And I'm like, Pirates? I love Pirates. I'll play Pirates. Because I actually, for a summer, I worked at Disneyland because I was down in Southern California in Orange County, where I went to high school. And I'd worked there for a summer. So I was a big Disneyland fan. You used to go there all the time. And so my favorite ride there was Pirates of the Caribbean. So I was like, oh, cool. This looks like Pirates of the Caribbean. I will totally play this game. And I had seen some of Fate of Atlantis because Colette had shown me that when she was down at CalArts, promoting LucasArts for jobs. And I was blown away. I thought, wow, these games have gotten way better. They're more cinematic now. They look like an animated movie. So I was, it's funny for me to, you look back on it now. Really, it looked like an animated movie, but at the time, it did. I was pretty impressed. I saw, the look. Billy Kint's backgrounds from Fate of Atlantis really blew me away. I thought those were great, so I was all excited. Um, so I downloaded. Me and my brother. My brother's in high school at the time. I was hanging out in his room because, I didn't have a place to stay. I just graduated, so I didn't have a job yet, and we just popped in. Monkey Island 2 and started playing together. And that's the great thing about adventure games is you can play together. You can play as a group. 2 or 3 people can just jump in and they can say, hey, did you try that with this? Did you pick that up? Hey, talk to that guy. And that's what we did. Me and my brother would just sit there and, tootle around. We had so much fun. It was such a fun game and it was so funny. And he was bummed because he'd have to go to school because he wasn't quite finished. He had another month left. And I would solve some stuff during the day. He'd get kind of mad, but he'd be like, well, how'd you do that? Oh, I put the rat on this, and then I cut this. I got the knife from here. And we just loved it. And then Fate of Atlantis did finally come out. We got that and started playing that too. So I was all jazzed. I was all excited when I got to LucasArts. But the funny thing about the test was, I don't know, Prince of Persia had come out. It was a big hit back then. This is 92. And it was all motion capture. A lot of it was not motion capture. It was rotoscoping. It's not motion capture. It's like that stuff that in the 70s.
What
What's
they
his
did
name
with the
used to do?
lightsaber, basically.
Yeah. We copied over a lightsaber, but there was a lot of animated movies that were rotoscoped at that time. Too, like the Lord of the Rings animated movie, and Ralph Bakshi. That's it. Ralph Bakshi did a lot of rotoscoping, and rotoscoping was like I don't know. It was like poison at CalArts. It was like that's not real animation. That is, that is the most disgusting thing ever. It's not real animation. So rotoscoping was a swear word at CalArts animation program. Um, so when I got there, apparently Brian was thinking about doing rotoscoping for all the characters in the dig, and so the test was to trace over screenshots of Brian Moriarty walking on a treadmill. And I was
Cool.
like, okay, I'm intimidated and meek at this point. I'm just like, okay, what can I do? All right, fine, sure. In my mind, I'm like, what? Why am I doing rotoscoping? I thought I was here to do animation. This isn't animation. Like I said, my mindset was like, this is unholy. Rotoscoping, really? I mean, I just walked past Kyle Balda doing some cool, squash and stretch, stuff for Day of the Tentacle. And I was like, that's what I want to be doing. I mean, that's the fun stuff. So I was like, but whatever. I want to get a job here. I want to work for George Lucas. I want to work here at this office. It's awesome. And so I spent a day and a half going over it, and it was really slow because I was used to working on the Amigas and the PC was really slow, and I wasn't used to that either. And finally, somebody came in and like fixed it for me, so it would go faster. I was like, "Oh, okay," because this was taking too long. And but I worked on it. I pointed out to Sean. I was like, "Hey, there's a little hitch in Brian's walk, and I kind of smoothed it out and I made it bounce a little bit more. I was trying to put some animation in it, and I had to you had a model of Boston Low, the original Boston Low, and I had to kind of put that on him and make him look like Boston Low walking. So I got that done pretty quick because it's rotoscoping. It's not that hard. So I had like another 8 hours left, or maybe 6 hours left. And I said, "Well, I'm done, Sean. Sean, what else can I do?" He's like, "Yeah, well, why don't you just do something on your own?" I'm like, "Okay, cool." So I had an idea for a film where a dragon was like had eaten too much and he was bloated, but he still wanted one more snack, and he was chasing a bird around. And because he'd eaten too much, he couldn't get off the ground. So I thought, oh, I'll animate that because I had storyboarded it and written it out, but I hadn't animated it. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just animate that. So again, with the depaint tool, I'll just stamp little circles of somebody trying to get off the ground, a little dragon, but I do it in perspective again, like he was small and he'd run right by the screen. And it was just circles, and little X's for hands and so forth, and maybe I'd draw a couple lines for the arms, but it wasn't much. And the bird was easy because it's just two V's, so I had the bird fly by, small flyby. And so he's trying to get this thing, but he's bloated and he's too heavy and he can't do it. So it's just one little scene. So I kind of whipped that out, just kept it real simple. I didn't draw the dragon. I just kept it circles and little pluses and so forth. But you could see the motion. I mean, it looked like, when you see motion capture and the guys are wearing the balls, on their shoulders and so forth, it kind of looked like that, but you could tell the motion, no problem. And so I left that, and so that was it for the test, and I left. And then, a week later, they said, yeah, we'd like you to come work on this Spielberg game. I'm like, Spielberg game? Oh my God, my head exploded. I'm like, yeah, work on a Spielberg game? No problem. So Larry Ahern had told me, because he was working there at the time, he's the lead animator on the Day of the Tentacle, Maniac Mansion 2, and he told me they all looked at my stuff, and they weren't impressed with the rotoscoping because they're like, well, there's nothing here we can see that shows if he's a good animator. I'm like, yeah, no shit, Sean. I don't know why you gave me that test. But they saw my dragon. They go, oh, yeah, that's really good. I like that. Yeah, look at the squash and stretch. That's exactly what I want. And Larry was really big into, those kind of animations. So he really liked it and thought it was really good. So it's because I did that little dragon, test, little extra test that I got the job at LucasArts. Plus, I knew Depaint pretty well by that time because I'd used it for like 3 or 4 years at CalArts. So I don't know if that answers probably a ton of the questions you already had, but
It answers some of the questions I had.
okay.
Now, you probably were hired to work on the dig, but it wasn't the project that was the first one that shipped, right? The first project you worked on that shipped was Rebel Assault.
Yeah. So when I got to LucasArts, they told me, oh, it's a Spielberg game. They didn't really tell me much about the history of what's going on. They I think they were a little embarrassed that they had done a previous version of the dig and it got canceled, and they wanted to forget about it. And I'm not sure why, you interviewed David Fox, right? So he probably
I interviewed
told
David
you.
Fox and I asked him about the dig because it was around that time in 1989. I think the first meeting they had was on the day of the 1989 San Francisco earthquake. It was in October 1989. So he was in Lucasfilm Games around that time. So I asked him, and he told me that he didn't want anything to do with the dig. It was the project that at the time everyone tried to avoid. And I think Noah worked on the first version.
Oh yeah, Noah. Yeah, they kept on calling it Noah's Dig. On Noah's Dig. I'm like, who the hell's Noah?
So
Who's this Noah guy?
Noah Falstein, who worked on Fate of Atlantis, then he was the first project leader. And then it went to Brian, and then it went to Dave, and then it went to Sean. But at the time when it was Noah's Dig, it seemed that nothing was working out that well.
Yeah, so this is what I was told, and it probably doesn't jive with what he said, because you know how, that game of telephone, you hear from somebody and somebody. What I was told was that there was a previous version, and it wasn't as fun as they hoped, right? And they had the game look a little bit more like Alien, have that Ron Cobb kind of technical feel. But then they had a planet that had a ton of cool creatures and plants and so forth in it. And they had some really good artists working on it. Terry Whitlatch, who ended up working on Star Wars, and then Ian McCaig, he did all these great drawings of characters and so forth. But the pixels, 320 by 200. You have this great drawing that Terry Whitlatch did, and then you're trying to animate it in pixels, and it's hard to translate. So I remember going there and looking. They had all the art in these like big giant drawers that you put art in, flat files, and I would go through the folders and look at this like, oh my God, you did all this artwork for just this one game, and it ended up not being used. So I think a lot of people were pretty bummed that there was a lot of work put on it. I know Larry Ahern worked on it too, and he was pretty bummed that a lot of the stuff he didn't get used. But it allowed him to get experience so he could work on Day of the Tentacle. And I guess he worked on Monkey Island 2 as well. Yeah, he was a big Monkey Island 2 animator. So I didn't know much about it. Suddenly I felt like, slowly it dawned on me. I was like, oh, am I on a unpopular project that's kind of cursed? Did they kind of throw me in the fire? But then I've, talked to Brian Moore, and he's like, no, we threw all that stuff away. We're going to start from scratch. We're going to do something completely new. I got some new ideas, and this is what it's going to be. And the way he described it to me felt a lot like a Michael Crichton book. And because I'd read a couple of Michael Crichton books, probably 3 or 4, and it felt very similar. It was like the scientists are isolated and they're super smart and they kind of compete with each other, and then they kind of backstab each other, and there's this interesting science behind it. And so I was like, oh, okay, all right, we're doing a kind of realistic animation, nothing too cartoony, not like the stuff I saw on Day of the Tentacle. Okay, all right, we'll do that. But Spielberg, I got excited. Like, Spielberg's going to see this animation. He's going to see the animation I do. That's exciting. So that kind of motivated me. I got to do a good job. I want everybody to really like this game and what we're doing. So I put in a lot of extra effort to make every little detail perfect. So I had to do a lot of the astronauts. So for a while there, the astronauts would float, and there was a bunch of different astronauts. There were 4 characters instead of 3. And I put a lot of detail into all the creases of the spacesuit while they're walking around, and had a lot of fun with it. But every once in a while, I just do an animation when nobody was looking of Boston Lowe flying a glider and then smashing into a wall, and just sticking there like Wile E. Coyote and then falling down. And where I was sitting was they didn't have a cubicle area or area for my desk, so where I sat was basically kind of in a walkway, a hallway, and I had no room. I just had a desk, and then endless amount of people were going to see Colette, head of the art department, behind me. So people would just walk behind me all the time, and so they can always see everything I was doing, all the animation I was doing. And a lot of times they'd stop by, and I would sense that somebody over here is looking at my stuff, and then they walk by, and then somebody else would look at my stuff, or somebody would talk. So it was a great way to meet people. So that was cool. I remember one time I was still trying to finish Monkey Island 2, and Dave Grossman, I'm forgetting people's names. Dave Grossman walked by, and he started talking to me about the game, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I programmed this, I wrote that dialogue, and here's this puzzle where I get this puzzle from." And I was like, "Cool, wow, one of the creators of the game is actually helping me with the game." So I thought that was pretty fun. But the funniest animation I had to do was with the 4th character that got cut from the final game was this character Toshi.
Toshi, yeah.
Yeah, and Toshi Alima. I remember there's a town in Marin County
the
called
Japanese
Alima.
business tycoon.
Yeah, which we thought was funny because Alima's not a Japanese name. It's it's a Native American name, I believe, for a town nearby. And we mentioned that to Brian. Brian's like, "Don't worry, I got a way to explain that." And we're like, "Oh, okay, all right, fine." I never found out what that was.
Did you get the explanation?
No, never got the explanation. So he said he was going to write it in, but he was, I think, way behind in his writing duties, but it's because he had so much on his plate, so many things on his plate. Poor guy. Yeah, so many things on his plate. So I feel bad for him now. At the time, I was like, "Come on, dude, let's get this stuff done." And I got annoyed things were getting done. But now I look back on it, I was like, dude, you know how much work he had to do? He had to write the game, he had to, direct the game, he had to work on the puzzles, he had to do PR and marketing, and he had to deal with a new engine. They were trying to make a new engine. think it was called Story Droid in the scripting language called Landrew or something like that. And it's got all new people coming in, and now there's a ton of animation and cutscenes. We got to up our game a lot more. So there's like 4 or 5 animators rather than just 1 or 2. He's used to working on Loom with one guy, Mark Ferrari, or maybe 1 more animator. And yeah, he had a ton of crap to do. And then on top of it, it's a Spielberg game. Everybody's in marketing, they're all excited by it. Everybody in the art department was kind of sick of the dig at the time, but they had no idea. They had no idea what was coming up. But they're already kind of sick of it. And but anyway, so I was doing animation of Toshi, and originally they have a puzzle where the alien ghost would guide you across a river of lava, and he would point where you're supposed to stand. And then as he was writing this, I think Hal Barr would point out, he's like, in Fate of Atlantis, we already have a lake of lava. So it'd be kind of dumb to have that in 2 games in a row. And so Brian's like, oh, yeah, okay, we'll do something else. We'll do acid. We'll do a pool of acid. So I'm like, okay, cool, pool of acid. So it's crusted over, and the ghost, I animated this like ghostly hand that would point where you're supposed to step, and then it would disappear, and then you're supposed to walk your characters over there. So you do the puzzle, and then the other characters just follow you. But the last one was Toshi, and he steps in one area he's not supposed to step in, and he falls into the acid. Now, my idea was the acid was sort of like a kiddie pool. It was only 3 feet deep, maybe 2 feet deep. And so he'd step in and go, ugh, and then his foot would be in the acid, and his other foot would be in the acid, and he fell in, fell forward. But he could get out. He would get up and run out. So I'd have him run out and climb up on the shore. But while this is going on, the acid eats off all his clothing and then eats through his skin. And by the time he gets there, he has no skin left. He's just a body with muscle and bone and so forth. And he's writhing in pain. So I'm doing this thing because Spielberg wanted a bunch of gross stuff in there. I don't know if you remember this, but Spielberg at one time was into gore. If you saw Jaws, but he had wanted a bunch of gory stuff in the game. I don't know if he wanted this particular gory scene, but he definitely was into gore. He had some ideas about cutting a monster's eyeball out and using it, and close up of, Brink's hand getting cut off, and that sort of stuff. And ironically, when Jurassic Park came out and all the kids were like, it's too violent, I wanted to see dinosaurs. He called us up and said, hey, tone down the gore and violence, would you? We're like, we already animated it, dude. It's kind of too late. And so we did eventually lower the gore, but we still had a little bit in there. So as you imagine, people walk by and they'd see a poor little Japanese businessman fall into acid and get burned and fall out. And now originally when I would do the animation, I would do these little, like I said, little dots. I'd do a dot for the head, a dot for the hips, little tiny dots for hands and legs, little lines. And so they would just they'd come by and they'd see this like, little thing and like, what's going on? And then they come by again and they see, oh, there's some flesh down there. Oh, it's burning off. And they come by me and they're like, oh my God, that's horrible. Look at that. And they'd all start laughing because it was so horrible. So I didn't know this, but so many people were walking by that apparently people over in A building, which is where all the business and programmers and designers and testers were, that they'd walk by and they'd tell people, oh my God, the dig is really violent. You should check out this animation of this guy falling in acid. So pretty soon people kept on coming by constantly looking at this thing in acid, and they were blown away by it. And a lot of people were like, wow, that animator's good. I'm like, nah, I'm okay. The real animators are the ones over at Pixar. But yeah, that was the big animation that I guess cemented my reputation. I'm very good at making a little guy burn in acid and fall on the ground, writhing in pain. And I wish I had a copy of that animation somewhere.
Wait, you don't have any copy of that animation of Toshi?
Probably not. I mean, I'd have to go into my garage and look through all those things and see if I kept any of it. I mean, LucasArts technically doesn't want you to take any of that stuff. You're not supposed to show
it
any
in their archives or something?
Yeah, maybe. Do they still have archives? I have no idea. I mean, I know at one point they had all the art, the 2D art, the physical art in flat files, and I know they had the floppy disk. They had that big case of floppy disks. Mark Ferrari had worked on a sequel to Loom for a while. I forget what it's called. Do you know?
Forge.
Do you know what it was? Forge. That's right. And I remember pulling those discs out and looking at the Forge art, and I was like, "Oh, this is amazing." Um,
Wait, there's unused art for Forge by Mark Ferrari
yeah,
in the
yeah.
archives?
I don't know if they have an archives anymore, but maybe, yeah. It was all done in deep paint. I remember Billy was a little annoyed with Mark's stuff because he wouldn't do anti-aliasing. Deep paint could anti-alias, and Billy was like, I kind of wish he would do anti-aliasing because it's very jaggy. And I remember taking his art and just for fun, not for real, but I would anti-alias some of his stuff, just for fun, and I accidentally saved over it. So there's some of his Ferrari art on deep paint with just a little bit of anti-aliasing on it that I accidentally saved over. So now I feel bad, but I assume Mark has it. And you might hit him up, and he might still have it.
I'm interviewing Mark in a few weeks.
Yeah, ask him
So
about
I
Forge.
hope he has copies of the art he did for Forge.
Yeah, I don't think it was a ton of art, but it was at least 3 or 4. His stuff's amazing. By the way, I love his art. If you,
I never
you
got
know,
the sense that they actually started working on the sequel. It always seemed
yeah,
like.
it might have just been concept art. It's probably just ideas he was working out. I don't know. I don't know if they had a final design or anything, but yeah.
Anyway, back to Toshi. In 1993 British TV show, a few scenes from Brian's The Dig were shown, and
Yeah.
it showed a scene in which the fourth character, probably Toshi, removed his helmet and started suffocating. Was that Toshi? Was that an animation that you worked on?
I didn't work on that animation. That's probably Anson Jew. So it was Anson Jew, me, and Avril. God, I forget Avril's last name. Avril Harris? Yeah, I think it's Harris. Yeah, her husband does those Toe Jam and Earl games. Um, so she was there animating, and Anson. So I think Anson made it. Anson did it, but I think it was a joke. I think Toshi's joking. I think he takes it off and goes and then he falls down. They're like He's like, no, it's fine. So I think he pops up and says he's fine. I could be wrong, but that's my recollection of that.
And the reason Toshi was removed was because of the gore, or because he was
No, that was
uninteresting,
Sean's.
or
No, just Sean felt that four-person dynamic was too complex, and the story would be better and more digestible and easier to work out if it was just three characters interacting with each other. So that's why in his version he got rid of him. And it's on the box, actually. I think there was a version of it. But I'm looking back up. I have a copy right there.
yeah, I
Unopened
also
German
have the
copy.
box over here. I have the English
Yeah.
version.
Oh, okay. And yeah, I might have some in my garage. I have a bunch of old games in my garage from LucasArts. Probably people want me to put it on eBay, but I'm like, I want to collect them. I want to keep them for myself in my garage. But yeah, Billiken came in and I had him, I showed him how to use Photoshop and he painted out Toshi, but he left his toe in, which is now a rock. So it looks like it's a rock. He's like, I'm gonna leave
In
it
the
in. A
final
little bit of
art,
Toshi. Yeah, final cover. I can't see it on that one because that's a
I have it
holographic
over
cover.
here. Let me just
Yeah.
remove my background.
So I think Toshi's
Mm.
where your mic is. Yeah, let me look at it. Yeah, I think there's a little rock in the shadow. I think that's Brink on the right side, and
Let me see.
there's a rock there, and that's actually Toshi's toe.
Oh man,
True. Yeah, a little
good
trivia
to
there.
know.
Yeah. So yeah, that was Sean Clark's decision. Yeah, I'm fine with it. Um, that was cool. I guess he wanted to simplify it, maybe cut back down on dialogue and interactivity. I mean, a four-person game would have been interesting too. It probably cut back on animation, so we obviously had to do a lot more animation for everything.
Now,
So
speaking
yes,
of simplifying the game, The Dig remains the only LucasArts adventure game that has no verbs and has only one cursor. Now, some might say that also has just one cursor, but the drafts in the game serve as verbs, while The Dig, all you need to do is click hotspots to perform an action. Now, this wasn't always the case with The Dig, because early
I don't think so.
previews, even from a year before release, show that there is a verb interface or icons like in the Sierra days.
Yeah.
So why was that removed and the interface was simplified to one cursor?
Well, I don't remember exactly how how Brian wanted to do it. I can't remember exactly, but I do remember icons, like a little green guy pushing or something.
Mm-hmm.
I forget. Something like that. You would know better than me. I haven't really thought about the dig in a long time. I probably should have done a little, brushing up on it
Wait,
before I did
wait.
the
So in
interview.
the version you've worked on, you didn't have that UI? You started out working when the UI was already just one cursor?
Yeah, I believe so. I think Brian's version had icons, if I recall correctly. I remember Brian's version had this cool idea called idea icons, which I thought was, a good idea. No pun intended. And I kind of wish they'd kept that. But so Sean just finished Fate of Atlantis, and then they were working on Sam and Max. And by the time he took over the dig, he had already made Sam Max, and he wanted the interface to be similar to Sam and Max. So that's how I believe we got the final interface on Sean's dig. Um, I think he just felt more comfortable doing it that way, so he didn't have to readjust to a new system. I mean, at one point I was like, I saw the full throttle one where you
Mm-hmm.
bring up the icon. I love that one. I thought it was great, and I created one actually for the dig. I made it into a pentagon similar to the crystal, and I made it looking kind of crystally like it was glass, and
No,
put those
cool.
icons on it. And I showed it to Sean, and he just outright hated it. I was like, yeah, but it's cool. Look at what Full Throttle's doing. He's like, I'm sick of what Full Throttle's doing. We're doing something different. We're doing what we're doing. So, yeah, at the time there was a little bit of internal, I don't know what you call it, rivalry between the dig and Full Throttle at the time, because Full Throttle was like the popular game at LucasArts. It was the darling of LucasArts at the time, and everybody was sick of the dig, and because it was like the third 3.5 versions later, and everybody was tired of it. So we got a lot of slack, not slack, but a lot of static because of that, and we got a little defensive. I think at the time Sean was a little defensive about anything to do with Full Throttle. I mean, I think now obviously he likes it and has no problems with it, but at the time, we were getting annoyed with how we were feeling a little bit marginalized by people at LucasArts at the time. Um, there was even a couple emails where people were giving us a hard time, and I'd always stand up for us. I'm like, "Shut up! We're doing our good. It's a great game. Blah blah blah. Be quiet. You shut up." you know, I'd always just stand up and defend the game. Um, but yeah, and they were, it's funny because Full Throttle, because I'm good friends with Larry Ahern, and we go to lunch, and he would get annoyed with the dig because the dig got endless amount of PR. Everybody was talking about the dig. Nobody was talking about Full Throttle because Spielberg was involved, and it was a serious game, and people were all excited by a serious game coming out of LucasArts, a sci-fi Spielberg idea. So it would get outside the company. The dig was very popular. It's like, oh, 5 years, it's gonna be super realistic. They must be spending 5 years on it. It's probably gonna be photorealistic and 3D and all this stuff. So expectations were pretty high. Um, and unfortunately, in my opinion, by the time the game came out, I think it looks kind of old. I mean, now it's just lumped in with all those games at the time, so it doesn't look old. It just looks like a, early 90s game. But at the time, we had, little dudes walking around, whereas Ben Throttle is like this big dude walking around, very, and stylized and very animated and very cinematic. And so that's one thing I did push for on Sean's Dig. I go, dude, we have to have cutscenes. We got to have cinematic cutscenes. We got to use the engine technology for streaming cutscenes that we got from Rebel Assault. That
Insane.
uh, yeah. Vince Lee had created. So I was like, we got to take advantage of that. We have to actually do cutscenes. And Sean kind of didn't want to do it because he was used to, what they had. And he didn't want to do cartoons. That was one of the biggest things Sean didn't want to do. He didn't want to do anything cartoony. And I was like, well, we can't make these guys look photorealistic, and the technology to do them in 3D isn't there yet, you know. So what are we going to do? We just have these little dudes walking around. But if we have cutscenes, we can, do a close up, we can cut, we can do cinematic stuff, all the stuff I learned at CalArts. We could do that, and then it won't seem like it's just a bunch of little dudes walking around. Ah, I'm falling, I'm dead. Ah, I fell down. So if you have dramatic shots and cut, and then something's coming at you, and you can pan the camera and use the language of film to tell the story. And then when you interact, we can have these little dudes walk around. And look what they're doing at Full Throttle. I mean, we're going to come out after Full Throttle, so we need to at least look as good as they do. So that I was able to talk him into that. But he didn't really like the outline cartoon look of any of the designs we came up with. So Sean Turner, again, the guy who used to work at ILM, was like, hey, maybe we can, color them similar to how it was done with Roger Rabbit, with a fuzzy shadow and fuzzy shading on it. Because if you look at Roger Rabbit, he doesn't look like a flat cartoon. He's very rounded and shaded and kind of looks like he fits in there. So we tried doing that to make Sean happy, and he was finally okay with that. What was funny is, so Brian left the dig, and so I didn't have anything to work on. So they said, "Hey, you can help out with Full Throttle, not Full Throttle, Rebel Assault." And I was like, "Okay, I'll work on Rebel Assault." And they basically had me do special effects, like, "Oh, can you animate Darth Vader's cape? It's cut off here. Can you animate snow when the speeder hits the ground, and figure out some techniques to do that," which I figured out. And then they're like, "Oh, we have these cut scenes, but they're really hard to do, and we're not sure how to do them. And so what we're thinking of doing is we'll take photographs from the movie, and maybe we'll paint over those and animate the characters, talking or whatever. And you got to change their face because we never got buy off from those actors to use their image in the game. So what we're thinking of doing is we'll take a screenshot, but we'll get somebody like Wayne Klein or the president of LucasArts at the time, and we'll get them. We'll replace their face. We even got Steve Purcell. We'll replace his face with Steve Purcell, and then we got to animate him, and that was a pain in the butt. That was not fun. I mean, it was cool when it turned out. I would have to do this kind of fake lighting with lamps that we had just on our desks, and take a screenshot, and hopefully that lined up with the lighting of the scene. But I wasn't really happy with doing it because I just thought it was pretty static and not very interesting. And Photoshop was finally wasn't on the PC yet, but it was on Mac, and I'd used it a little bit. And I was like, hey, we could change some of the backgrounds in Photoshop, because Photoshop's very, you can do photorealistic stuff. The Indiana Jones TV show had shown that you could do that, and that's what it's mostly used for. And I went over to ILM and they showed me how to use it, which was cool. One of the guys who did all these effects, and that was the good thing about the Sean Turner connection. He worked at ILM, he knew all the guys there. And so we could go over there, and then sometimes they'd come over and show us Photoshop. So I was like, we could paint these backgrounds, like a matte painting in Photoshop, make it look photoreal. And that's what we did some of the times. And then finally, there was one scene where, like, oh, we want to have a scene at a bar, like a lounge, a pilot's lounge in the Rebel base, but we need the characters to talk and so forth. And we don't have a screenshot of that. There's no screenshot of that anywhere. Before, we would take scenes from Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi and show. This has to be a completely new scene. So I was like, okay, I can paint one in Photoshop, and then we can put the characters in there. But that's gonna be hard. I don't know how to. He's like, well, you could kludge it together from cutouts of different characters and pilots. I'm like, that's a pain in the ass. Why don't we just go up to the ranch, to the barn, the archive barn, put some people in a suit. I'll take them over into the conference room. We'll set up light, and we'll just film it. Okay, and then I'll hand cut it out. And eventually he looked at me and was like, oh, well, I'm not sure we can do that or not. Okay. And then, all right, let's ask. And so we went to Steve Dotterman, who's like third in command of the company at the time, and asked him. And he's like, well, I know the guy up at the archive. Yeah, let's contact him. And so the guy at the archive is like, sure, we can send it down. No problem. We can send down the costume in a box and show you how to hook it up and so forth. And by the way, when you get these props, they are pieces of garbage. They are terrible. They're plastic. They're cheap. They're dirty. They got stickers that are peeling off. They're really cheap. They're really cheap looking. But on film, they look great. That's one thing I learned about props, because there was a bunch of Star Wars props around. It's like when you grab them, you're like, oh man, this is just spray painted. This isn't metal. What is this? This thing's super light. That's not really metal. That's just plastic. So things are really, really cheap. I couldn't believe how cheap that they were, but they look great in the movies. But then we got a full stop coming from like the head of Lucasfilm. Said, no, can't do it. And we're like, what do you mean we can't do it? It's like, only George Lucas can film Star Wars footage, so no can do. I'm like, well, this isn't really Star Wars footage, just for a game. Yes, it is. You're using a live action camera. They're Star Wars characters. They're in Star Wars costumes. Only George Lucas can film Star Wars stuff. I'm like, really? Is George Lucas going to come down and film this scene for Rebel Assault? Nope. So I'm like, what are we going to do? He goes, well, how about this? We'll have George take a look at it. I'm like, oh, okay, we'll send the file to George. No, George will come down. When he's down at ILM, he'll come over and he'll take a look at your scene. I'm like, George is going to come over to my desk and look at the scene I'm doing. Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. My stupid idea affected George Lucas's day. Wow, that was kind of exciting. And then I thought, hey, am I the first person to film live action Star Wars since George Lucas, technically? I'm like, well, according to this president of LucasArts, I guess I get, or Lucasfilm, I guess I am. I'm like, wow, childhood dream. I'm filming Star Wars. Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. There's some trivia. Bill Tiller, first one to film some Star Wars footage outside of George Lucas.
Well, actually, in Rebel Assault 2, in the back of the box, they've written that Rebel Assault 2 is the first live-action footage filmed since Return of the Jedi, but it seems
they're full of shit because it was me. I did it. They were wrong. So
maybe they are talking about things that were actually released or published. Or
no, it got in the game, for sure. So it's in the game. Yeah, we filmed it. We had
scene that you filmed.
Yeah, it's in the game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, it was Rebel Assault 1. Well, it was my idea that kind of started that, to be honest with you. If I hadn't done that, there wouldn't be Rebel Assault 2 with live action. Because I proved, I had other people helping me out. Mike Levine. He said, oh, I got a friend who's got a green screen. Let's go to his studio and film the green screen. I'm like, okay, fine. We'll go there. We filmed it. They actually acted it out. I'm like, really? You don't really need to act it out. I'm going to just take this footage and manipulate it, and then when you're just going to voice over, you're not going to see your voices. Just do the simple actions. And I had it, in the Photoshop, and he had it so the green screen would fit within my Photoshop background of the bar, and or the lounge, pilot's lounge. And everybody got all excited. It became this big thing. Like, oh my God, can we do this? Everybody started showing up. We had all these producers showing up and people showing up, and they're like, oh, should we consult with Hal Barwood? He's made films. I was like, guys, calm down. It's just a scene. I'm just filming. This is so low res, guys. It's fine. It's going to be very easy to do. We don't need all this high tech stuff. It's 320 by 200 pixels. All right, 250 colors. It's nothing. We can't even animate the whole screen. We can only animate 40% of the screen because of the compression algorithm. And everybody was just making a big deal out. I had no idea that I'd opened a can of worms, a live action can of worms. And so I put the scene together, and they're like, okay, George Lucas has to come see it. So they're like, oh, he's going to come tomorrow to the conference room and see it. I'm like, oh, he's going to show it at the conference room with the big screen? Wow, that's cool. And I can talk to him about it. He can give me some cinematic pointers. Oh, I get to talk to George Lucas. So I show up, and I'm all excited, and I get to the conference room, and my boss says, oh yeah, you can't go in. I'm like, what do you mean I can't go in? There's no more chairs. It's filled. I'm like, how is it filmed? It's my scene. It's a conference room. It's big. Well, everybody's in there. The head of LucasArts is in there. His second in command is in there. Hal Barwood's in there. Marketing's in there. Second in command of marketing's in there. Vince Lee's in there. Project leader. The producer's in there. There's no more room. I'm like, but it's my scene. It was my idea. I don't get to go in the conference room and hear what George Lucas has to say, about the scene. So I heard about it later, and George is like, it's fine. He looked at it and goes, it's fine. I might zoom in a little bit closer, because it seems like a long shot, which we couldn't do because, like I said, we can only move 40% of the screen. If we move closer, it would take up, more than 40% of the screen. So we did it as a long shot for a reason. And and that's how he said. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. If it works for the game, you film all the Star Wars footage you want. I don't care. That's good. Love it. And left. That was it. It was all this big deal, and George had no issue with it either. I mean, I heard at one point the reason why nobody's supposed to film live action footage was, I guess, ILM was trying to do a little short film to show off some of their techniques because they wanted to get more work, and they were going to show this film around. And I guess the film got to be a big deal, and it got bigger and bigger, and George is like, whoa, you guys don't make films, you only do special effects. Lucasfilm makes special, movies. You don't. You just focus on effects. And so he made that rule that no live action footage. But when he saw that everybody was, that it was the future, he's like, yeah, this is fine. And he even said the same thing I did. So 320 by 200, it's going to be easy. You guys got it easier than we do because we're using 70 millimeter film and it's tougher. It's going to be real easy. And then he left. And I'm like, okay, that was it. Okay.
Wait,
But
so you're the reason why LucasArts made their first FMV game?
yeah, yeah. I mean, there was, some animation done and photographs taken from Star Wars, photorealistic stuff taken from Star Wars, some footage taken from Star Wars to put in
Yeah.
Rebel Assault. But this is the
Mm-hmm.
first time we filmed an actual scene with actors in Star Wars costumes, with lighting and their green screen and all that stuff. I didn't think we needed that, to be honest with you, but they wanted to do it. They wanted to try it, and they're like, hey, this is a chance to look into it. Maybe live action is the future of video games, So let's do that, and let's invest in it. I'm like, dude, we really don't need this. This scene can be over with really quick. I can do it in a day. It's no big deal. Let's just get to the conference room. I'll film them. I'll cut them out. It's easy. It's easy. 320 by 200, 256 colors. It's not like, a giant blockbuster movie in the cinemas on a giant screen. It's not like in CinemaScope. Okay, calm down. But nobody calmed down. Everybody got all excited. Pretty soon they're like, live action this, live action that. We were working on a Indiana Jones game at the time. I think Iron Phoenix,
Mm-hmm.
with a Canadian company, and they were doing an animation. Anson Jew was animating it, and Bill Stoneham was kind of art directing it. And at the time, the Batman animated TV show came out, the first one. It's a very stylized, very Art Deco version. And Anson had the brilliant idea, I thought was the brilliant idea, of doing a version of that, except with Indiana Jones. Because I was like, that's appropriate, because the Batman TV show takes place like in the 40s. And that
Mm-hmm.
style would translate to Indiana Jones really well. Because, again, we started going higher resolution, we had bigger characters. So it was going to be very difficult to make them shaded and like the little dudes in Fate of Atlantis. We wouldn't be able to do all that detail. We couldn't animate all that detail because it would just take too long. Cartoons look like cartoons because they have to. They have to be stylized to look like cartoons because at the time you couldn't put a lot of detail in your cartoons. You couldn't put a lot of texture or wrinkles and that sort of stuff. You could if the guy was 60 pixels tall, but once it gets to be like 200 pixels tall or 300 pixels tall, everything is going to flatten out. You can't animate all this stuff, and the details in the face. You just have to simplify it with a drawing. And so Anson's like, well, if we're going to do it that way, let's just stylize it similar to how they're doing with Batman, the Batman TV show. So he came up with all these cool designs. They're pretty neat. Indiana Jones looked really cool. He had these baggy pants and he was very stylized. And I thought it looked great. I'm a big fan of animation, so of course I loved it. But Bill Stoneham didn't really care for it. And he wanted something more realistic. His backgrounds weren't very stylized. They were more realistic because he'd worked in movies. So the two styles weren't fully meshing, and he wasn't happy with it. But when he saw what we were doing with Rebel Assault and filming it, he was like, "What? We can film shit? I didn't know we could do that. I thought we couldn't do that." It was like with the Rebel Assault technology, you can stream it in. And so he was like, "Hey, we're gonna go that way. How about we go that way?" So that was a bummer for me, a bummer for Anson, because he had created this cool style, and I really liked it. And I would have liked them to go in that direction, but it seemed like the winds were blowing toward live action. So the team on that project got all excited and they started filming. I'm like, so we're gonna get Harrison Ford down here to do this game? And like, no, he doesn't work on games. He only works on big blockbuster movies. So I'm like, so how are you gonna do that? Oh, we'll get a local actor. I'm like, seriously, you're gonna get a local actor to play Harrison Ford in a live action indie? Like, yeah, it'll be fine. I'm like, seriously, you're gonna do that? Um, I shook my head. I just thought it was a terrible idea. And ultimately, they did film it. They filmed an actor, and he was walking around, and they actually put him in front of Bill Eakins' backgrounds. I mean, Bill Stoneham's backgrounds, and I didn't care for it. Sorry, Bill Stoneham. We're friends, and we're colleagues, and we have a history and get along great. But I have to say, I disagree with that one with Bill on that one. And I let it know. I'm kind of a dumbass. I let my opinion know a lot. What I'm thinking a lot, wear my heart on my sleeve, which is not a good idea, in corporate America. So yeah, I got a lot of pushback for my criticism of it. you know. But me, Larry Ahern, and Anson, we were all just sad, because we had this really cool looking Art Deco Indiana Jones, um, style going that looked like the Batman animated TV show. So I was all excited by that. But I feel kind of bad because I think doing that live action Rebel Salt scene kind of opened up Pandora's box to live action. So when they did Rebel Salt 2, we had a new president at the time, and he wanted to spend more money on it because Rebel Salt, came out and made a shitload of money. It made like $86 million, which was crazy at the time. And George Lucas sat up and he was like, "Whoa, what? One of my games made $86 million?" And that was because CDs were taken off at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Before there was all floppy disks, and basically Vince Lee is like, "Well, we'll just use the CD like a laser disc. We'll just stream off, the video off the laser disc," which is a brilliant idea, and he got it working great. And guy's a genius, and I love him. Love Vince Lee. He's great. And because I was coming from an animation background, so I was like, "Oh, we can finally put some little movies in our video games. That's cool." So yeah, they wanted to really go to town on Rebel Salt 2, and yeah, they spent a shite load of money. The new president at the time, the second in command, so halfway through the game, our president left. Gotta forget his name. Randy Commissar. Randy Commissar. He was there for about a year, and then he left. Um, and the new president, Jack Sorensen, was not happy with Rebel Salt 2 because of how much money they were spending on it, the live action stuff. So Hal Barwood was there. I don't know if he was there directing it, but he was there overseeing it because he had experience with live action. And he was trying to explain to Jack, "Hey, this is what live action is. You need a seamstress there." He was like, "Why do we need this person here? Why is this person? Am I paying for that person?" "Yeah, you need somebody to get food for the actors. You need to get somebody. You need a seamstress there because what if your costume rips? We need another copy of this, or this. If this prop breaks, what are we going to do? We have to have two versions of those props. We're going to have to stop all production. We're going to need these lighters. We need an electrician. There's a union." And Jack Sorensen was like, "I don't know about this, guys. I don't know." So, and then Rebel Salt 2 came out, did pretty good, but not great. I think it was at the tail end of the rail shooters because I think a lot of rail shooters came out after Rebel Salt, and
Mm-hmm.
it just kind of did okay. And so the Indiana Jones game, there were some issues. They decided they didn't want to do it. Hal had written the story, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to be the project leader on it. I think Eric Wilmunder was the project leader on that for a while. And you'd have to ask them; they'd know the details. But something about working with another company in Canada on it. This was, I think, the Iron Phoenix one. And then, I think the kicker was Jack said that in Germany they would not be thrilled with an Indiana Jones where they were bringing Hitler back to life, and that was the plot, using the Philosopher's Stone, finding the Philosopher's Stone and using it to bring Hitler back to life. It takes place in the 50s. Hansen did this great animation of Hitler coming back to life, the skull and everything. It was almost as gory and gross as like the end of Raiders Lost Ark. It was really good. This is really good animation. It was awesome. It was in a close up too. And then
Just
so
in
Hitler,
reverse.
yeah, in reverse, and come to this skull and then then the Philosopher's Stone's supposed to like not work, or somebody Indiana takes it away from him. I don't know, maybe it's part of his body or something, but it gets taken away, and then Hitler falls apart. But he doesn't fall apart. He kind of explodes in a gooey mess. Like stuff comes out of his mouth, like goo comes out of his mouth and ears, and he falls apart again, which Hitler deserves for sure. You know, he deserves that over and over again. But it was a really good animation, and I was like, wow, that's cool. This is going to be a fun game. But then, yeah, Jack Stone says, yeah, Germany's like 50%, maybe 30% of our revenues, so we're not going to do that. So we have to change that story. And so it just got canceled. I think the story did get turned into a comic book, and I think it was Dark Horse comic book that Hal ended up writing. So there might be Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix comic book out there. I'm pretty sure there is.
Yeah.
So that was kind of that's what happened with that game. And then Rebel Salt did okay. Rebel Salt 2 did okay. I don't think it did as well as they wanted because there wasn't a Rebel Assault 3. I mean, if it had done really well, there would have been a Rebel Assault 3. But the cool thing that we learned about Rebel Assault was the use of pre-rendered 3D. We used it a lot, and it became pretty clear with Doom coming out and then Dark Forces that you wouldn't have to do live action. You could do fairly more realistic not a lot more realistic, but more realistic than these little 60 pixel guys walking around, characters in 3D. And so instead of going live action, everybody moved toward CG, computer graphics, 3D models for characters, and that just became the norm. All the Star Wars games after that, they were all, because it's just better. It's better for video games. It's just computers weren't powerful enough at the time to do a lot of 3D, real-time 3D.
Now, let me take you back to the time
Sure.
of Rebel Assault 1. The same year that Rebel Assault came out, Day of the Tentacle and Sam Max Hit the Road were also released. Now,
Hmm.
you're not credited on either of them, but did you take any uncredited part in their production?
Sam X? No, no, I wasn't. I wasn't on that at all. I saw them when they were making it, and I thought it was great. And got to meet Steve Purcell and got to know him, and got to be friends with him. And so that was cool. And Colette was dating him at the time. My boss was dating him at the time, and they were very protective of the IP, which as a IP owner myself, I totally understand. I might be even more protective of my IP than Steve Purcell is. I think he's a little more relaxed than I am. But if I see anybody rip off any of my stuff, I'm all over it. Stop ripping off my stuff. My lawyer's going to talk to you. So he was fairly protective of that. But I think with the contract he had, he couldn't really control it as much as he liked. So I think there were certain things about what Sean and Mike did that Steve would not have done. But overall, I think he was still very, very happy with how it turned out. Um, I think there's some issues with some dialogue that he thought that character would never say that. My character wouldn't say that. It's kind of weird dialogue or something like that. So there was a little bit of, you know, I don't know, creative tension, between there, but it wasn't too bad. The game still came out and was awesome, and it was great and fun to play. It's totally Steve Purcell. Steve Purcell just loves road trips. Loves road trips. I mean, if you see his animated TV show now, it's a road trip. It's on Disney Plus. It's about the Cars characters going on a road trip. I think it's just Mater and the Owen Wilson car, I forget his name, going on different trips. It's Sam Max. Just replace Sam Max with Mater in the other car, and it's Sam Max. Little shorts, and they're hilarious and they're really good. And you can just tell it's Steve Purcell. I was
Now,
talking to him.
on Full Throttle, you're credited for artistic support. Which artistic support did you provide?
Yeah, that was funny. Really not much. On that, we had a really good animator. This guy Gordon Baker. He actually got Academy Award for some of his animation on Nightmare Before Christmas, and he is such a good effects animator. He's amazing, amazingly good. And we got him on the dig for I want to say 2 months, and he was a great guy. He was fun to hang out with. Unfortunately, he moved to LA. So, but yeah, we used to be really good friends. He's one of the first person to ever use Photoshop because he actually rented a house on Thomas Knowles' property, and he'd have Gordon Baker come in and try this new. Hey, try this program I'm messing around with that adjusts photographs. So Gordon Baker, first user of Photoshop. But he was like really good at animating on paper and smudging it and doing all this thing. So in ILM, whenever you did lightning or anything, you do it black on white paper, and then you just reverse it. You do a negative of it and shine light through it, and that's how the lightning looks like it glows, because you have a light behind it and you have this black, and then you have this clear part of the film that burns onto the film. So he would paint all these really cool electrical scenes and so forth, and it made the dig look so much better. He did such a great job. But they needed a lot of explosions and effects in Full Throttle, and he didn't know how to do that in D-Paint, because that's all they had to use at the time. They weren't really using paper animation and then converting it, which is what we were doing with our cutscenes. So basically, I just taught him how to use D-Paint. I go, this is how this works, this is how this works, and I helped him with the animation and so forth. And then he just took off with it. Once he learned it, he just did amazing stuff. He did all those cool explosions and dust and crashes and stuff. So, Tim Schafer put out an email. He goes, "Hey, anybody work on the Full Throttle? And if you did, tell me what your title is. I'm going to put it in the credits." And so I go, I want special effects artist wrangler. Can I get that? because I always wanted Wrangler. I always love when they have like horse Wrangler or dog Wrangler in the credits. So I guess they just added it in. I don't know. What'd you say it
It's
was
just like
special?
they added Ghosts of Dig's Past in the Dig. In the credits at the end, you have Ghosts of Dig's Past and
Oh,
the
that's
list
cool.
of all the previous project leaders, Brian Moriarty and
Hmm.
Noah Falstein and such. Now, we shifted to Rebel Assault, but let's go back to the Dig.
Sure.
Did you get to meet Robert Patrick, who voiced Boston Low?
Nah, I didn't get to meet anybody famous, which kind of annoyed me. All the other previous Dig people got to meet Spielberg and go to his office. Bill Eakin did. Bill Eakin and Brian Moriarty did too. They got to meet with him. He's really apparently easy to talk to, and he's not like one of these guys. You can't stare at me. He's pretty relaxed, and he relaxes you that way. That's what he said. He's like, first I was nervous, but then after talking to him, it was just like talking to a regular dude. But what's cool is his office is great, and then he was really nice, and he loved LucasArts games, and he was very respectful of Bill and Brian and the work they'd done, especially in Fate of Atlantis and Loom. And he loves playing the games, and George Lucas would send him the games and say, "Hey, give me your feedback." I didn't know this, but apparently Spielberg gave feedback on some of the games. That's what he said anyway. And then when they were leaving, he drove them. He goes, "Hey, have you guys seen the new Jurassic Park ride or some other ride? Maybe it was ET ride." And he's like, "Okay, let's go." And he drive up in his little cart, and he let Brian and Billy can jump out and go on the ET ride and cut in front of everybody. And everybody in the line's like, "Is that Spielberg?" So Brian and Bill were feeling really cool, like, "Yeah, we're trying with Spielberg. Everybody's looking at us," and then we get to cut in line. So I didn't get any of that. So good for you, Brian and Bill. That's awesome for you. But after working on two versions of the game for 3-4 years, I did not get to meet Spielberg. I got a letter from him. That was nice. But
A thank you letter?
yeah, yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah. Not personal. It was to everybody on the team.
Hey
But I got a
everyone,
letter.
thank you for the dig.
Yeah, yeah. And why did it take so fucking long? He was nice not to say that. Uh, but yeah, he was probably annoyed with how long it was taking. But it's kind of his own fault that it took a long time because of his name was attached to it, and he was like the god of Hollywood at the time. He's still revered, but at the time, yeah, I remember he was super super huge, and so everybody was in awe of him. So to try and live up to his name became very difficult. And the one thing that Sean did, no, he did a lot of things right that I agree with, but one of the big things was, can we stop focusing on the fact this is Spielberg and George Lucas? Let's just make a good adventure game and not worry or focus with Spielberg. I know we've been worried about him and wanting to impress him and impress everybody to make it look. Let's just make a good adventure game, okay? We worked on Fate of Atlantis. I worked on Monkey. I don't know if he worked on Monkey Island, but I worked on Sam Max, and we're just gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna make another adventure game. It's gonna be fun. We're gonna use Spielberg's story idea. We're gonna change some things, but just don't worry about Spielberg, because that's been a problem. We have to, on Brian's Dig, me and Billy can, we're all starstruck that, it was Spielberg's game idea, and it put a lot of pressure, and marketing was putting a lot of pressure, and I think it just made things much more difficult, having Spielberg's name attached to it. But by the second time I worked on it, I was like, I don't care anymore. We just need to make a good game and get it out. We're doing this one. This one's gonna get made. Okay, this one's gonna get made. We're gonna do a good job with it, but it's gonna get made no matter what. Okay, if we have to compromise, fine. We have to compromise. If we have to do things a little faster, whatever. We're gonna make this game. It's coming out. Everybody's sick of this game. George is pissed. Spielberg's probably pissed. That the game's not out yet. We're just going to focus on getting this game done. And me and Sean were 100% in lockstep on that, where it's like we're plowing forward. That led to a little bit of tension with the art department, because people in the art department weren't in total agreement with some of the decisions we made. But again, they were working on, games that didn't have the pressure that our game has gone through and the history that it had gone through. So we had to make some compromises in order to get the game done in budget and on time. And still at the same time, we pushed to make it look good. We would have full animated scenes. We had really good effects animators brought on. We had a lot of new CG we added. We were told to use a lot of the artwork from Brian's dig, which I think now is kind of a mistake, but we added a bunch of new scenes because Bill Eakin's backgrounds are great from the dig, but they were designed for characters that were very small. And we wanted to make the characters
Hmm.
bigger, but the background didn't allow for that because everything was in a long shot. So the dude was walking around on the beach like this. Whereas I would have zoomed in and had the character walking around the beach, much bigger, more cinematic. So,
Now,
yeah,
as
we
you said,
decided.
not all versions of the dig were totally scrapped, and some elements from previous versions made it into the final game. Do you remember which elements came from which version?
Nothing from Noah's. Nothing from Noah's made it in the final game. Not a one. Yeah, that's why Sean went with three characters. I forgot. Yeah, so Spielberg's inspiration was John Huston's movie Treasure Sierra Madre had Humphrey Bogart in it
Hmm.
and Walter Houston, and it's a great movie. See it if you haven't seen it. And it's three guys. And so I think Sean was like, "Yeah, we're gonna just copy that dynamic." That's why we cut out Toshi. We don't need that guy. Whereas I think Brian wanted it because it was more like a Michael Crichton movie where you'd have 4 or 5 scientists, like something like Sphere or Jurassic Park, where you had 4 or 5 dudes. But Sean's like, "Nah, let's go back to the source material, not do this whole Michael Crichton thing. Let's go to Treasure Sierra Madre and Forbidden Planet." Those are the two things. I don't know if you heard that, but that was the two things
Hmm.
Spielberg said is combine those two together. Um, and so I think that's why Sean went back and did that. That makes sense. But that's it. So we did a lot of we didn't do any animation or character designs from Brian's dig to Sean's dig, but we did use probably 90% of the backgrounds, and they were all good. They were all really good backgrounds, and we had to cut a few, and I even left a few in that I just wanted to leave in because they look good. There's no puzzle involved in it. It's just you walk through it. It's like, oh, that's pretty, which is a mistake in an adventure game. You pretty much don't want to do that. You don't want to have a couple rooms that are empty. But I wanted also the game to feel like there's empty space. Not everything is interesting. It's an empty room. It's to give you an idea that this is a abandoned place. So we did want you
And
just to
besides,
wander
the
around and
game
wander.
the game allowed you to double click and exit and just skip the walking part. So that
Right? Yeah.
was.
Yeah, I love the double click because it helps you edit. It's like in movies we don't watch the character walk all the way to his car. He goes to the door and then we cut to him walking up to his car. In an adventure game, you walk to the door and then you walk from the door to your car, and that's kind of boring. It'd be nice to just double click door, boom, boom, car. You're there. So I thought that was a great idea. Very helpful to give the players an ability to edit out stuff that's not that exciting. Um, so that's about it. We kept some of the names, obviously, Boston Low, Brink, Maggie. Um, we kept the ILM effects. The asteroid's different. The asteroid's much more simple. Before it was a big, huge, in Brian's day, it was a big, huge section where you go through all these crystals and you find stuff, and there's a ton of rooms. And you have to figure out that it was a dodecahedron, 12-sided, 12-sided cube or figure. And you had to go to all the different points, all the different vertices. And so I forget who did it, but there was a background artist who did all the crystal stuff. And it wasn't as good as Billy, because it was still pretty good stuff, but it was just kind of boring because it was endless amount of crystal caves. I mean, I think even the artist was getting sick of it. So we did throw all that out and just kept it pretty simple. Open up the, I think you open up the cave in the bottom of the crevice, and then you go into the big room and put the 4 pieces in, and boom, it takes off.
Now, how did you ensure that the art style remained consistent throughout the game, given that it contained elements from previous versions?
Well, I had worked pretty closely with Bill Eakin, and I was a big fan. I love painting as well, and painting backgrounds. So I originally got the job, for a year and a half as an animator, but I really wanted to paint backgrounds. And so I would talk with Bill Eakin a lot. We'd go to lunch a lot. We'd hang out a lot, maybe too much, and I would learn his technique. So what he would do is he'd, get these poster boards about this big, and he'd paint it in black and white, scan it in, and then with some proprietary LucasArts software, we can move the palettes around because the palettes are, it's only 256 colors. And DPaint's not that great with moving palettes around. So we had this program called DK where you could, put palettes down, cut back the number of colors you had for a scene, and you could make the palette, be exactly the same. Palette manipulation was such a problem back then, which is no issue now. I know all these guys like doing retro pixel animation, but I'm like, yeah, you're skipping the whole limited color palette thing that we had to deal with. So he would create two versions of the backgrounds with two different colors. So one would be like orange, and the other would be purple. And then he would paint the highlights on the purple one and would bring through the orange one underneath. And that's how he would take this black and white image and paint it. So Brian scrapped all the old art, and so he wanted something new, and he and Billy can work together on some ideas. And Spielberg wanted it to be a Twilight planet. Dude loves Twilight, and so it's a perpetually Twilight planet. I guess it doesn't rotate. It's tidally locked or something with the sun. And lots of meteorites. He wanted lots of meteorites in the background coming in. And Billykin's like, well, I'll do some ocean. I'll pile of rocks, and Brian just focused on those rocks. And he thought that was cool. Maybe we'll just have 5 dodecahedron pillars. And Bill's like, okay, well, let's do some cool plants and stuff. And Brian's like, no. There was lots of plants and jungles in the first dig. We're gonna stay away from that. We're gonna go all rock. Everything's gonna be rock, which kind of annoyed Bill because he's like, really? How am I supposed to make rock interesting? We're having a whole room of rock. And so he's like, all right, well, what we could do is rock's kind of boring. It's kind of gray and orange. Don't mean to offend any geologists out there, but you want a combination of plants, building structures, vehicles, and rocks. But here we were just stuck with rocks. So Bill is like, well, I'll do this cool carving kind of thing, this random carving idea, and then I'll make it colorful. I have a lot of colorful light. So that's how we got this style that, it's very intense primary colors. The only thing I did different from what Bill did when I did the backgrounds was Bill tended to have 3 primary colors in his art, and I just kind of focused on 2. I just usually had a warm and a cool, and he would have 2 cools and a warm, like a green and a blue, and then he'd have a red. And I would just have like a blue and an orange, or a red and a purple, or something like that. But instead of painting, when I did his version, I knew his style really well. So instead of painting with actual paint scanning in, I would just hey, Photoshop's out now. You can use Photoshop. So I'll just paint with Photoshop. We had tablets. We finally had a tablet. Before, believe it or not, everything that we animated was a mouse. We used a mouse. When we animated on Brian's Dig, you had to animate with a mouse. So it was a lot nicer once we started having pens and Curta tablets and Wacom tablets. And so I would paint everything in black and white, just like Bill, but in Photoshop. And then I would use this exact same technique where I would make one version is blue and one version is red, and then I would manipulate the palette, drop it down to 256 colors or less, and then we had the color cycling. So he showed us Billy can have a particular type of color cycling, and I think he learned that color cycling from Mark Ferrari, because Mark Ferrari is the master of color cycling, and he's the Lord God King of color cycling. And we didn't have as many colors to work with as Mark would do with his later, with that calendar thing he did. But we learned from the calendar, and we looked at the calendar how he did stuff, and he had higher resolution, so we couldn't quite do it. But what we'd do is we'd make circular color cycling palette, so it looked like there was, a color cycling of curves, and then we use the distortion technique and rotate it until it was in perspective. And then we sort of draw it in. So it'd be underneath the image, and we sort of just kind of paint it in. And the closer you got to the shore, we'd paint more and more in it. So there's a little bit of color cycling at the distance, but you get more and more. And it looks pretty good. So Billy came up with that technique, and I kind of learned a little bit from Mark Ferrari's calendar and did some more with the waterfalls and how he uses this every other pixel is one pattern and the other pixel is another, and these 2 curves come together. It looks like waterfalls. So I kind of learned from him, from Billiken and Mark Ferrari, even though Mark Ferrari wasn't there. And but that's basically it. I just knew Bill Leakin's style, but I used more modern technology to do it. Using Photoshop and the color cycling, the engine that we had to copy it and make it look a little bit better. So
now you talked about high resolution. Now, in my conversation with Brett Taylor, who worked on the Scum engine at Humongous Entertainment at the time, he told me that the high resolution support was already implemented in the Scum engine around the same time, but LucasArts utilized it only years later. Was there ever a plan to release a high resolution version of the Dig? If not for DOS, then at least for for Mac or for Windows 95?
Well, I wish. No. Mm-mm.
I mean, just
You know,
double the resolution.
yeah, I know exactly. That makes a lot of difference, by the way. I mean, it makes a lot of difference, because it's finally more pixels than you have for television. So 322 is below television, and then 640 by 480 is higher resolution television. Which I was excited by because I was like, oh, great, we have more pixels in television. We can at least make our stuff look as good as The Simpsons,
Mm-hmm.
and other animated TV shows. But I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know much about the Scum engine other than what Sean would tell me. I mean, Eric Wilmunder, I think, became the Scum guru once everybody
Mm-hmm.
left. He was the guy who stayed behind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So I know he made some changes. He allowed for different, perspectives and, different things. He would add things to the engine, made it easier for programming. Worked on iMuse, I think. But you'd have to ask him; he would know for sure. And I just went along with what Sean had said. Now, if we'd gone high res, I could have just taken Bill's paintings. We still had them and scanned them in and recolored them. That would have been really easy. So,
Yeah, I mean,
eh,
I understand. I understand that if you take a 320 by 200 and change it to 640 by 480, then it's problematic because it's not exactly double the size.
mm-mm.
But maybe 640 to 400, then it would have been, just double the scale.
Yeah, maybe
Or
maybe we could have done it, and Sean, for technical reasons, didn't want to do that. For production reasons, didn't want to do that, because we'd have to take the old art and up-res it, and I don't know if it looks very good. To me, it looks like it's blurrier. So we would have had these sharp characters walking around these blurry backgrounds. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I had known we could do high res, I would have done it. But there was that thing where Ron left and he worked out a deal that he could keep the Scum engine, and he was supposed to give updates to it.
hmm
And I think there's a conflict
yes.
between him and Jack Sorensen on that. So you'd have to ask Ron about that. But I think he's got a gag order on it, so I don't think he can talk about the
No,
settlement.
Brad Taylor talked to me about it in
Oh,
my
okay.
conversation with him. So the deal was that they at Humongous Entertainment were allowed to work with the Scum engine and update it,
Hmm.
and all of the updates would go to LucasArts, but nothing that was worked on at LucasArts would go to them. So Eric
Right.
Woolmander would add features, but Humongous Entertainment would not get them. But
Yeah.
anything Humongous did, they would get. So that's why they
Hmm.
had the high resolution at the time.
Right. Okay. Well, I know I talked to Jack about it, and his perspective is completely different than Ron's. I've talked to Ron about it. So they have completely different views. So I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. They're probably neither one's lying, but from their point of view, they see it this way and they see it that way.
I
But I
should
do,
get everyone for one conversation and then get them to argue.
yeah. I don't. If Ron could talk about it, he'd probably know it best. I don't think Jack would even remember at this point. He's probably retired. I don't know where he is. He's probably. I don't know. He probably doesn't do interviews, but
We'll get him out of retirement for one last interview, just like in the movies.
yeah, I don't know. He's a grumpy dude. I don't know if you'd want him on, actually. He's funny. He's very sarcastic and dry-witted, and he gets grumpy. You can rub Jack Sorensen the wrong way pretty quickly, as I discovered on multiple occasions. But overall, he's a pretty reasonable and nice guy. If you're reasonable with him, he's reasonable with you. But yeah, I don't know. I guess he didn't like the deal that they had with Ron, and I guess I don't know. I don't know if they went to court over it, but maybe there's talk about going to court. I don't know the details. But yeah, so it didn't affect us. So if they had high res, we didn't get it, or we couldn't use it, or it wasn't
No,
implemented.
you
So
eventually used it in Curse, but you didn't use it
yes,
in real time in the
well,
dig.
yeah, I was told that Eric is the one who upgraded it to high res.
Mhm.
So maybe not. Maybe he got it from
It's a good
Humongous.
thing I'm talking to Eric in a few weeks, so I'll ask him, and
There
then
you
I'll
go.
take Brad's version, and then I'll see which one I believe.
Yeah, there you go. And then I know Eric for Christmas he added a bunch of other features that we needed in the high res. Um, and I think he came up with a feature where you could color the animation of the character walking around, and it would take colors from the background palette, which is great because we used to have to save a whole row, like 16 colors, maybe more, for each animated character, and that was a pain in the butt for our backgrounds because they get less and less colors. But then, in Curse, we were allowed to have a lot more colors and just save a row for the interface. So the interface had limited colors, which is why they kind of look very similar. They all have that kind of yellow color to them. I think they have a lot of brown and yellow.
Okay, we'll get to Curse in a second. A
Sure.
few more things about the dig. Now,
Sure.
one of the most infamous puzzles in the game is the turtle skeleton puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't find it to be difficult when I first played the game in the 90s, but that's because I found the fossil in the game that can be used as reference for the puzzle itself. Now, screenshots that were released prior to the release of the game show that the fossil was added rather late in production. Was it added because of feedback from the playtesters, or what's the deal with the puzzle?
Maybe. I mean, it might have been. God, it's hard to remember, but it
Do
might
you
have been
remember the
me.
fossil?
Yeah. It's barely. It might have been me. I kind of feel like you got to give a lot of hints to players. I think Sean enjoyed puzzles that were way harder and less easy to solve.
Intuitive.
Intuitive, easy to solve. He wanted them to be harder because he felt like you spend more time on gameplay, and he also got some feedback that a lot of people like that when it's really, really hard to solve a puzzle. But I was like, well, this is a Spielberg game, and a ton of people who don't play adventure games normally are going to play this game, so I think we need to be a little more fair with it. I was like, we might even have an easy mode. It might be like might want to go that way, but they didn't do that. Um, so yeah, I probably pushed for that. I mean, it sounds familiar. I might have did we have like a drawing on the wall, or we had a fossil in a wall, right?
The fossil was on the ground in the
Hmm.
lagoon, like you
Okay.
have the turtle puzzle next to the water, and then
Hmm.
when you exit that room there's a hill, and there's an exit to the lagoon.
Yeah.
So on the ground over there, you have a fossil, and it's pretty dark. So most people probably don't notice it, but it's there,
Mm.
and that's the solution to the puzzle.
Yeah, I haven't played it in a long time. You obviously played it recently. You played it like
You
last
should
year, right?
play it. It's a great game.
Yeah, I played it
It's
a
my
lot,
favorite
but
adventure game.
is it okay? Well, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, we were again worried when it came out that it was going to look old and people wouldn't like it because people at LucasArts didn't like it because they were sick of it, and it did look a little old compared to like Full Throttle. But fans and critics loved it, so I was like, okay, everybody outside LucasArts likes this game, so I'm happy with that. And you like it, so yay, thank you. Because I worked on it, for a long time. I'm sure it shortened my life. Such a stressful project. I'm sure it shortened my life. Everybody who worked on it probably shortened their lives.
Now,
The
given
funny
that
thing,
you made LucasArts move to switch to FMV back in '93,
yes,
were there ever plans to make an FMV adventure game? Because in '95, FMV adventure games were quite popular with Phantasmagoria 1,
yeah.
and then Phantasmagoria
Sean
2 a
wanted
year later.
Yeah, Sean wanted to do live action with the dig, and I, being an
Really?
animator guy, I was like, no, that's gonna look terrible, dude. No. He's like, well, let's just test it out. They actually got somebody in an orange suit to look like Maggie, and they actually filmed it, and I was there, and I had to pretend to be one of the Cossitans. I'd like, look at my hand. All right, talk to the hand up here, okay? And then she would look up, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is gonna look terrible. And sure enough, he tested it out. He wanted to test it. He was really into it, and but when we did it, and I'm like, it's not gonna fit with the backgrounds. And when we put it in, yeah, it looked like shit. So we ended up not doing it, and that's when we came up with the compromise to do it, you know, uh, Roger Rabbit style with a more shaded look to the characters to make them not look so flat and cartoony. Um,
Now,
so
did you take part in the design of the packaging of the dig? Because the package, the big box basically, is pretty impressive. With the lamination and the fact that it opens like a book.
yeah, it's
And
got that little holographic look to it.
yep.
Yeah. No, it had nothing to do with it other than at the time they would put a lot of people, Monkey Island 2 came out and it said game by Ron Gilbert. I'm like, cool, Ron Gilbert did all the art. and he wrote it and programmed it and did all this animation. Wow, Ron Gilbert's talented. And then when I got to LucasArts, I'm like, oh no, there were 12 people who worked on the game. Why is his name on there by Ron Gilbert? So we were kind of annoyed by that because it was going to say game by Sean Clark. I'm like, dude, there's other people who work on the game, and the artists were like, hey, and the programmers were like, hey, you, can we just not do that because it makes it seem like only one dude did it, you know?
Hmm.
And I think it goes
It's
back
like
to
Brian
EA.
Moriarty's Loom.
Yeah, yeah. I think it went back to EA back in the early days in the 80s where EA tried to promote all their game designers almost like rock stars. So they really tried to focus on this not cult of personality, but this idea that these guys were superstars in the gaming industry. Um, so we were kind of annoyed with that. But, on the opening cover, they did add
Yeah,
a little
when you
credit at the
open it,
bottom.
your name is written at the bottom.
My mom loved that. My mom just loved that. She would go to the store and go, "Hey, there's my son's name. There's my son's name." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess that's the compromise we had come up with." Ultimately, I think we just got rid of the name on the cover. I think I don't think Full Throttle says by Tim Schafer, does it, on the cover?
I think it does.
Does it? I
I'm
think it
not
does on the
sure, but
poster. Yeah, well, somebody knows. But I know ultimately they said, okay, let's just stop doing that ultimately because it is rubbing people the wrong way that one person's name's on the box. Um,
it does
but
say on the cover of Full Throttle, it says a heavy metal adventure by Tim Schafer.
well, there you go. So his was the last one. Does it have anybody else's name like Peter Chan or Steve? Um,
Nah,
it doesn't. All
no,
right. Somehow, am I the only artist who ever got his name on the cover or inside cover of a game at
probably
Lucas? Oh man. Okay, that's a bummer. Because I know Peter
because you
Chan
took
and
a stand and you stood for your own rights.
well, it wasn't me. It was probably Colette, in the art department and the programmers too. I know Gary Brubaker got his name on there too. So, which he should, because like I said, we worked very hard on that game, and we helped design it. I mean, we did. I mean, Larry Ahern helped design Full Throttle, and so did Peter Chan. Everybody came up with that idea. Originally Tim Shaver just wanted to have a biker game. I mean, he asked Tim and Larry about this, but my understanding is he wanted to have a biker game, but I think it might have been Larry and Peter Chan's idea to go more sci-fi with it and give it a bit different feel, which to me made it feel special and original. So I did like that. And I know Larry's pretty convinced that a lot of the ideas and so forth were his, but everybody was just in a brainstorm room when they came up with it. So Tim, had the basic structure, but then Peter Chan and Larry Ahern would go in there and work out puzzles, and I think Steve Shaw, and so a lot of people contributed. Same thing with the dig. We contributed to a lot of the puzzles, and I storyboarded and directed all the animated cutscenes and so forth. So I mean, Sean didn't really have a lot to do with that because he didn't go to film school, So it ended up being falling on him, in my lap, and so it just felt like it shouldn't just have one person's name on the box. And so I guess Full Throttle is the last one to do it. But I wasn't the only one. Like I said, it wasn't even me. It was I think it was Colette who did that. Pushed pushed to get rid of it, and the programmers. I don't know who was head of programming at the time, but so
Now, the project you worked on after the dig was Curse of Monkey Island. Were you a fan of the series at that stage?
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, well, like I said, when I got there, me and my brother had been playing Monkey Island 2, which I thought was awesome. I love the backgrounds in it too. Steve Purcell and I forgot there was one other artist. It might have been Peter Chan. Did all these awesome backgrounds. I thought they look great. They did
Mm-hmm.
it in marker and then scanned it in. So that was a change from Monkey Island 1, which was all mostly Mark Ferrari pixel stuff, pixel work on D-Paint. So I just thought it looked beautiful and it was great and it was funny and the music and it just sucks you right in. It's just this great mood and perfect humor, perfect balance. And so I played that, but I remember this guy told me, no, 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 don't play Monkey Island 2, play Monkey Island 1. I'm like, Monkey Island 1, it looks kind of pixely. I don't know. Do I want to play that? So I was like, all right, fine, I'll play Monkey Island 1, but this one seems so pretty. But then I started playing Monkey Island 2 and Monkey Island 1, and I was like, holy shit, this is better. Oh, this is funnier. Okay, wow. I went from Monkey Island 2, which I thought was great, to Monkey Island 1, which is even better. And the artwork's still great, even though it's pixel, it's pretty damn awesome. Mark Ferrari's colors and design are really good. So I'm a fan. If you haven't picked it up by now. And so yeah, I played both of them. I thought it was great. I remember one time I was working the dig, and we were walking downstairs, and we were talking about games that we might do in the future. And I was talking to one of the programmers on the dig, and I was like, "Yeah, man, I really wish we would do Monkey Island 3 because I really want to work on a Monkey Island 3." And he just started laughing at me. He was like, "Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen with the sales of Monkey Island 2." I'm like, "Oh no, really? No, really? They were not good? Nah, it wasn't that good." I was like, "Oh, I loved it. I really wanted to play it." And so yeah, I always wanted to work on a cartoon game because I've been working on the Dig and Rebel Assault and Super Return of the Jedi and Super Empire, Indiana Jones Greatest Adventure. These are SNES games or Super Nintendo
Hmm.
games. So Star Wars, Indiana Jones, the Dig, Rebel Assault. I was like, oh, it'd be nice to work on something cartoony because my background was in character animation, or at least my what my training was. So I never got a chance to work on something cartoony. So yeah, I totally wanted to work on Monkey Island 3 because I was a big fan of the first two. But I was like, yeah, Ron's not here anymore. I don't know how we'd get a chance to do it. Maybe. So I was kind of gave up on the fact that we would never do another Monkey Island game. So I was a little bit bummed, by that. But I don't know how it happened. But ultimately after the dig was done, and because Jonathan Ackley was working on the dig, he was one of the programmers on the dig, and on and off. He was there when Dave Grossman briefly was going to be in charge, and then he went over to work with Brian on that one Ron Cobb space trucker game. I forget what it was called. And then he came back. And then when he came back, he teamed up with Larry Ahern, and they were going to work on a game. And I think Jack said, "Look, people really want a Monkey Island 3 game. European fans especially really want a Monkey Island 3 game." I'm like, "Yeah, let's do a Monkey Island 3 game." And I think Larry didn't really want. Well, maybe he did, but I feel like he's like, "Okay, I'll do this one, but I want to start working on my own ideas. Like what Tim does. I want to come up with some new ideas." Um, so that way, Full Throttle was cool and Green was cool, but what if we had, two people coming with ideas, new games? So it wasn't, we weren't relying on, one group to do sequels and Star Wars stuff, and one group, one guy doing the original stuff. It'd be nice if we had two or three guys doing original stuff. Because I do remember being told that Lucas George himself wanted us not to rely on Star Wars or Indiana Jones, but come up with original game ideas. So I think that was true for a while until it started making a ton of money, and I think George Lucas changed his mind at that point. Um, I've been told by people who know George that he's two people at once. One, he's a creative genius and will not compromise his artistic vision, and the other is he's a full-on shrewd businessman who is out to make as much money as possible so he can donate it to charity, which is his
Of
his
course.
motivation.
Yeah.
Well, he likes creating beauty in his house and his properties, and but he's big into charity. A lot of people don't know this, but he gives a crap ton of money away, especially in Marin County. He'll like repave roads. He'll make swimming pools. He'll give this woman who needs an electric wheelchair, give a wheelchair. He'll help out teachers. He gives a shitload of money, but he doesn't crow about it. So that's his motivation to make a ton of money, is that he likes to create new innovative companies and things and technology, and he likes doing a lot of charity work. He really likes to help people out. Um, I was even told by somebody who was in marketing, like when marketing tested Darth Maul, they said, "Oh, Darth Maul's great, George. He's really great. Are you sure you want to kill him at the end of Phantom Menace?" And George's like, "Yeah, absolutely. He's going to die. It's important for the story that he has to die because we're going to have another guy come up in the end." And no, they go, "But he would make a lot of money, and we could do it. He's very popular. He's testing really well." No, I'm not compromising. And then, like, I don't know, a week later, the same guy goes to him, goes, "Well, I'm going to make one last pitch that you keep Darth Maul alive because he's a really popular character." And George is like, "Yeah, whatever. I don't care. I'm just doing this to make money off toys anyway. Sure, we'll just keep him alive." So the marketing guy's like, "I don't know which George to listen to on this one. Is it the money making George, or not. So getting back to the original idea, Larry was like, well, let's follow what George wanted, which is to make original ideas and not just do Star Wars stuff over and over again, or in this case, do Monkey Island. But he was happy to do a game, because he had worked on Full Throttle, and he felt like he had, done a lot to help the game to form it the way it was, and he felt he had done enough creative work on it and stuff that he deserved to, work on his own game. But I think, when somebody new starts out, they get them working on something that already exists. Like, so when Tim and Dave, when Ron left, they had to work on a sequel to one of Ron's
Hmm.
games. So I think Jack felt that you should follow that same formula. And so we'll give Monkey Island to Jonathan and Larry. And he didn't care that Ron Gilbert wasn't there to work on the game. I think at the time Jack did not care for Ron. Probably Ron didn't care for Jack. I don't know that for sure, but I definitely get the sense that Jack was not a fan of Ron's and didn't really care. Jack's more of a straight up businessman. So in some ways it was cool because he was not intimidated by the fact that Ron wasn't going to be working on a very popular and beloved franchise. So that opened up the door for Larry and Jonathan to um, do their take of the game. Um, so, but some people, I won't say who, some project leaders were like, "Yeah, it's a Monkey Island game. You can't screw it up, so they'll be fine." And Jonathan and Larry like, "Thanks for the vote of confidence, guy." Um, and yeah, you can screw up a Monkey Island game, it
Yep.
can be done. Yeah, it can be done. Um, so I think Larry and Jonathan, sort of like we had the pressure with Spielberg, we had the pressure on this from Ron Gilbert and his legacy. His ghost is floating around. But again, we did what Sean, wisely did on the dig, which is like, let's just focus on making a good game. Let's our philosophy is we'll make it funny, silly, and we will try and give people a piratey experience. We're gonna do things that pirates do, and we're gonna focus on that. We're gonna have fighting, and then we're gonna have sea chanties, and we're gonna have ship battles. Cannon. You're gonna shoot a cannon. They even wanted you to at one point make a puzzle where you could make your own pirate flag, and that would be part of a puzzle, but they couldn't figure out a puzzle for it. Um, So they wanted you to be able to do all sorts of piratey stuff. And, we were big fans. Larry had worked on Monkey Island too, so he kind of knew Ron's, thinking and he understood the process of making a Monkey Island game. And Jonathan's really funny. And he worked on the Dig and some other games. And so he has experience too. And he was a big Monkey Island fan too. And they did a lot of, research. They played the game a ton and talked to people and so forth. And the funny thing is the new people at LucasArts didn't care that we were working on Monkey Island 3, but I have to say the older people were like, "What?" You know, that's it's sort of like I don't know, like somebody new doing a Star Wars movie. It's like, well, I don't know if somebody should be doing that. It really should be George Lucas or maybe somebody else directing Godfather 4 or something like that. That's Francis Ford Coppola. I don't know. Should be doing that. Don't touch the holy Monkey Island. We're like, well, what do you mean? We can make a Monkey Island game. We love that game. We have total respect for everybody who worked on the game and the game itself, and we revere that game. Um, and we can just take what he did and go forward. In my mind, it's sort of like Stan Lee created Spider-Man, but and it's great, but he couldn't always do Spider-Man. Some other writers were going to have to come up and do Spider-Man, and Steve Ditko's an awesome artist, but other artists were going to have to step in, and that allowed for a lot of creativity. Maybe it's not exactly what Stan Lee would have done, but it took Spider-Man and all the other comic book characters in different directions that kept it fresh, and that's kind of the way we looked at it. And that's the same thing when we did with the art. We realized the art was now 640 by 480, and the background palette didn't have to be like 128. It could be 240. So we had a lot more colors for the background because now we had the new technology where the characters take their colors from the palette of the background. Um, so that was a big deal, and we could colorize the characters in the background. So if they walked, they would be shaded. I mean, alpha channels, so we can have the shadow. So yeah, we just plowed forward. So Jonathan and Larry worked alone for quite a few months, coming up with the idea and the story and the plot, and I was kind of in between projects at the time. So I wasn't really working on it, but I wanted to work on it, and they weren't sure how many people they'd have. They weren't sure what art direction they were going to go in yet, and they weren't sure that I would be able to do it because I'd worked on so many realistic stuff: Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Rebel Assault, and The Dig. So let me jump back to The Dig real quick. So on the first Dig, I was an animator. So when Brian quit the project, I went to go work on Rebel Assault and the SNES games. But I kept on saying, hey, we weren't going to cancel The Dig. So I was like, hey, when The Dig comes back on, I want to work on it. But I don't want to be an animator. I want to be a background artist because I work with Bill and I know how he does it. And I got Photoshop skills now. I got Photoshop on Windows. And Colette, the head of the department, was like, I don't know. We're thinking about bringing somebody in from the outside. I'm like, no, don't bring somebody outside. I can do it. But they go, well, you're such a good animator. We don't want to lose an animator. I have to find another animator to replace you. I'm like, but I really want to do this. It's like dream to do background art. Ever since I was a kid looking at Disney movies. Come on, let me do it. She's like, I don't know about that. I'm like, getting mad. So not mad at her, but frustrated. That I could see her thinking, it's logical, it makes sense. But I was like, I know what I can do. So she left for work, at 6, and I was like, screw it. I stayed until like, I don't know, 1 o'clock at night. And I painted a background in black and white. And then I made the multiple versions and did the exact technique Bill Eakin did. So I proved that you could do that. And then I busted out with the color cycling, the Mark Ferrari watercolor cycling that Bill Eakin had taught me, and made this cool scene with the colors and the lighting. I even had color cycling for a reflection of the water coming up and hitting some of the stuff. And I made this underground looking room, which actually ended up in the Dig. And I went over to Colette's desk. We didn't have passwords at the time, and I just put the disk in, and I brought up DPaint, and I put the image on her screen, and left it on, and turned off her screen. And then the first thing she was going to look at when she came in was my scene. I put a little note there. I go, see, I can do it. And she went in and she saw it. She's like, okay, all right, yeah, that's really good. Okay, okay, all right, you got the job. So I kind of did the same thing, except I took a little bit longer with Curse of Monkey Island. Because I hadn't done any cartoon backgrounds, but I'm like, I went to CalArts, the mecca of cartoons. I think I know how to do cartoons. So, and I was like, I can do the Monkey Island 2 style. If you want to go Monkey Island 2, I can totally do that. I don't need to do markers, but I can do it in Photoshop. And yeah, they were like, well, we're gonna keep our options open. I'm like, again, deja vu. So luckily, George Lucas gave everybody a bonus that year, and with that, I proposed to my wife. I used the money to buy a ring and proposed to my wife, and but we weren't gonna get married for a whole year, and we had an opportunity to go on a little cruise in Florida because of some sort of discount thing or something. Maybe it was one of those condo deals. Come to Florida and then we'll try and sell you a timeshare or something. And then so I was like, oh well, then we're gonna spend 2 weeks at Disney World, and so I took that bonus money and we went to Disney World. And I went to town just taking tons and tons of pictures of everything at Disney World having anything to do with pirates. We even stayed at their pirate hotel. I took a ton of pictures of that, and we went to the Bahamas. I took a ton of pictures of the Bahamas and used that as reference. I even bought a whole bunch of pirate-themed crap, that you get souvenirs and loaded up with them in a big bag, and I brought them back to the guys, Larry and Jonathan. I was like, here's some pirate shit. Here's some netting. Here's some flags. Here's a talking skull and everything. And we had a skull that if you walked by, it would trigger a scream. And I would put that when we were working on the game. I'd put that outside the hall, and people would walk by, and it would scream at them, and they get all scared. And I just thought that was hilarious. Everybody else was annoyed, but I thought it was hilarious. So I bought all this stuff and gave it to him. I was like, just a little bribe. Doesn't hurt. So they had a ton of pirate stuff in their office that I bought. But more importantly, I had all this reference, and I printed it all out and digitize it and had it. And I was starting to do pirate drawings because in between projects, you were allowed to work on your own thing. You had to work with your boss on it. In this case, Colette, and say, okay, I'm going to work on some new techniques. I'm going to try using Painter. I'm going to try and make things look like watercolor. I'm going to, do all this stuff. And I just worked on pirate stuff. So I do drawings of piratey things. And I talked to Larry. We go to lunch all the time. And I kept on working on them and working on them. And, ultimately I did so much pirate stuff that I forget how it was done, but I think ultimately Larry and Jonathan were like, all right, you got the job. We see that you really want it, and the stuff you're doing is awesome. And so, okay, you got the job. I was like, woohoo, awesome, I got the job. But then we had to spend 3 months doing pre-production, and during that time, I wasn't sure how they wanted to do it. I was a fan of the Hildebrandt brothers paintings and N.C. Wyeth's pirate paintings and Howard Pyle's pirate stuff. I was like, well, do you want it to look like that? And Jonathan was like, big, yeah. I was like, let's make it look just like Disney movie. Let's make it look exactly like a Disney movie. I was like, okay, we can do that. But Larry, on the other hand, and this was a good decision, said, no, 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 let's be a little more avant-garde with it. Let's do something a little bit different. Disney's Disney. Let's chart our own path. So let's look at some stuff. So we look at Calvin and Hobbes. We look at Peter DeSev's artwork. We would look at editorial cartoons. So a lot of the editorial cartoons, when they draw a jumbo jet, they're very exaggerated with it. And it's got kind of a sketchy feel to it. So I like that. And there's an animated TV show called Duckman that was really popular at the time that we liked. Well, at least me and Larry liked. And Jonathan wasn't in love with it, but they had an agreement that Larry was the final say, that he was going to be the art director. And even though he's the co-project leader, he'd have his jurisdiction would be all the art. And so we were pushing in that direction, and I would try different ideas, and I finally go, look, I'm just gonna draw a lot of different things, like 50 different palm trees, and you pick out which one you want. I'll try a different style in each one, and Larry, you pick out which ones you like, and that's kind of what he did. I go, here's a bunch of different buildings, just rough sketches that are different styles, and he'd say, I'd like this, and then I do, a bunch of other, islands and clouds and shit, and he would say, okay, I like this. And so I got an idea of what he wanted. And then he said, yeah, I want to kind of look like watercolor. And we really looked at a lot of Peter DeSev stuff. He's an artist who does a lot of New Yorker covers. It's a popular magazine, and it has really good illustrated covers. And he's also a really good character artist, worked on Disney and Blue Sky, did all the Ice Age character designs. So we looked at that, and I tried to copy that guy's style, but mix it in with my color sense, the Hildebrandt Disney color sense, and then mix that in with a little bit more exaggerated stuff like Dean Taylor. He was kind of one of the artists on Night Before Christmas. He's got a really exaggerated ink style, and Dr. Seuss, and just tried to combine those together in each drawing I did. And I finally came up with a drawing for the Barbary Coast. Originally, Barbary Coast was going to be over Danger Cove, and it was going to be at night. So I did a little version of a little cabin, and then there was a hole in the cabin. I figured, okay, maybe they cover the hole in the cabin with a pirate flag. So there's a big pirate flag draped over it. And then maybe we'll have a barber's pole out front, but we'll have a little pirate sign on it. And it'll be on an exaggerated cliffside, and there'll be a pirate ship down below that's all lit up. And then we'll have this moonrise, but I'm not going to do a circular moonrise. I'm going to make it kind of egg-shaped, and I'll do a pencil sketch around it and then colorize the pencil sketch and do this kind of swirly clouds. I'd seen like some swirly smoke clouds and illustrations in animation, and even a steeper cell like smoke thing he did for Dynatron City or something I thought was cool. I was like, oh, I like the curlicues. What if we do the clouds like curlicues? And so I just kind of whipped it out and went crazy with it. And I showed it to Larry, and Larry's like, oh, this is great. This is perfect. And Jonathan's like, the moon. Shouldn't you make the moon circular? It's like, no, dude, that's what we're not doing. And like Larry's like, yeah, no, dude, we're gonna go this way. And Jonathan's like, oh, all right, you guys are the experts. I don't know. I'm like, don't worry, it'll still look a little bit like a Disney, background. I will still have, those colorful, you know, contrasts and beautiful blue skies and render and paint everything. But we'll try and make it look like watercolor, and then we'll have black outlines around it. So I'll draw it in paper, and I'll scan it in, and I'll colorize it in Photoshop, and then drop it down to 240 colors. And and then that way the outline of the characters would match with the outline of the backgrounds. So that way they didn't
Hmm.
seem weird. So sometimes you see like Lion King, you got these outlines around these characters and they're flat, but you got these gorgeous painted backgrounds. It doesn't quite fit. That's why I like 101 Dalmatians better, because everything's kind of a drawn line and the characters are kind of drawn lines too. So I think it kind of fits better. Um, so that's why we went with that kind of style. And ultimately, I just revised that style until he said, "Okay, we don't have any more time." They told us to start production. So we had a long, long pre-production, which is cool because it allowed us to do what they call the artist's journey. So a lot of times you just got to plow through. Let's start. Draw those backgrounds. Draw those characters. Let's start. We got chop chop. We got to make a budget. We got to Walmart wants that game out. By Christmas, by October, you better get it in, or Walmart won't buy 5,000, 50,000 copies or whatever. But this time we had time to do it, and I think that's why we had such a radical change in view and looks, because we could have lines that you could see before. If you did that in 320 by 200, you wouldn't see any of that detail. So 640 by 480 allowed us to do a lot of that detail, and even when we had 240 colors, you could make more colors by putting pixels next to each other, like a yellow, like a green and a red. It kind of looked like a yellow because it was so small on the screen. You couldn't do that with 320 by 200, so it actually felt like you had more colors than 240. So the screen resolution change was a really
So
big
it's
deal.
similar to the dithering that Mark Ferrari did in EGA in Loom. He used dithering in order to make the 16 colors of Loom appear like there are more colors than there actually were.
Yeah, exactly. I'd use dithering a lot. I'd add noise to stuff in the background and so forth. And that was the reason we have so many clouds. I didn't want to have a lot of blues because they take up a lot of blues. So on the horizon, everything looks a little whiter, and atmospheric perspective, a little whiter, a little greener. And then as you go overhead, it gets darker and darker in blue because the atmosphere is thinner overhead than it is on the horizon. And so there'd be a lot of shades of blue. So I was like, well, if we put a shitload of clouds, or a ton of clouds, I don't know, can I swear on this? Should I ask if
Sure,
I
you
can
can.
swear? Oh, all right.
You can
So if
do
we had a
whatever you
shitload of
want.
clouds everywhere, we could cover up any of the banding that we would get if we didn't have enough blue colors. So that's why there's like a ton of clouds in every scene. And plus,
Interesting.
yeah, the Caribbean has a ton of clouds too. I mean, I've been on a couple of Caribbean cruises, and it does have a ton of clouds everywhere all the time. So it kind of fit. It was kind of a nice element in an empty space anyway. Um,
Now, in
so,
my
but yeah, that
conversation with Graham Annable, he mentioned that it was great to work on Curse of Monkey Island because you had the freedom to do whatever you wanted artistically because you weren't bound to anything else. You created your own style for the game.
yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, so that was at least the background style. I think the characters, for the most part, everybody liked, but there was a lot of tough decisions about Guybrush. That was the weird one. Larry wanted his character to look a little bit more like his personality. So he felt that Guybrush was too. I hate to speak for him, but I think he felt like the previous Guybrush's were too handsome and good looking, and I could be wrong. Go ahead and ask him about this, or not proper to his personality. And I think he felt somebody who's a little nerdy, a little more awkward, should look a little more awkward. But I think a lot of people at the company liked Guybrush the way he was. And I think a lot of the animators, too, who came from animation school that were new to the company, wanted him to look more like traditional animated character because it was easier to animate for them, and that's what they've been taught. So it was like it was their wheelhouse, it was their lane. But I think Larry wanted the whole project, including the character designs, to be outside everybody's comfort zone, going in a whole new direction. So I think Larry was right in that way. But it was it was a bit of a struggle for everybody to accept the new Guybrush. But once the game came out, I thought it was the right decision. I think it worked perfectly. I try to explain to people, look, we have to exaggerate characters now. We can't just make them look realistic anymore. They have to fit the cartoon feel of the game. what do you want to do? You want to do live action Guybrush? That you got Pirates of the Caribbean movie for that. Um, did you want it to be CG characters, walking around? No. I mean, if we made bigger characters and had close-ups, we can't animate them to look like those Ian McCaig paintings he did in D-Paint. Those beautiful, animations. Um, you just can't do it anymore. So if we're going to be animating it, we have to do it as a cartoon. And if you're going to do it as a cartoon, you need to caricature them. You have to exaggerate them. There's this really great character artist named Hirschfeld, and he did a lot of designs for a lot of maybe even New Yorker covers, where he'd take famous people and he'd do them very simply, and you could tell exactly who it was. He'd exaggerate their neck, but he'd get the eyes correctly and so forth, and you immediately knew who it was, even though it was a cartoon. It was an exaggerated version of them. It was like really quick to know that's who that is. And I think I even saw a TV show once where I think it was John Cleese did a science show, um, and he was talking about facial recognition, and he said the brain doesn't key on every element of somebody's face. It only keys on certain parts, like the shape of the eye, maybe the nose, and the mouth, and that's it. And it only remembers that part. It doesn't remember the jawline. It may maybe your chin, it may be your ears, but it doesn't remember all the details in it. So what caricature does is it just goes to those images and exaggerates them and makes them easy to figure out. So it's like eating a salad. It's you got a lot of work to do. It's good for you, but it's a lot of work. Whereas you could just eat a potato chip. It's real simple and real easy. Pop it in, and you've eaten it, rather than having to cut things up and eat things up. It's just really quick. Your brain just automatically loves it because it's super easy to recognize, because that's the way the brain stores memory. So I had to explain this to a lot of people who did not like the fact that we went to a more exaggerated Guybrush. And I think ultimately fans bought it. The young fans love it. They have no problems. The older fans, they don't like it so much. If you played Curse of Monkey Island when you were 5 or 6 years old, that's your frame of reference. You just love it and you think it's great. And you look at the older ones and go, I don't like that one as much. Or the newer ones, like, I don't know if I like that as much. It depends on when you first looked at something. It's like original trilogy Star Wars guys versus the guys who were kids and they love, all
Yeah,
the Clone
that's my
Wars.
theory. I think that people's favorite Monkey Island game is usually the first one they played. So, for example, the first Monkey Island I played was Monkey Island 2. That's my favorite. A lot of people, a lot of our viewers really like Curse of Monkey Island because that's their first Monkey Island. Now, it's funny
Yeah,
that you should mention the backlash about the art style, because we've experienced a similar thing with Return to Monkey Island,
yeah,
where
yeah,
there was a
absolutely.
backlash about the art style. And I remember back in 97 that there was some backlash about the art style being changed from Monkey Island 2 to Monkey Island 3.
Yeah,
But nowadays, 25 years later, people forgot all about it and it's a fan favorite and everyone likes it. And sometimes they even like it more than the original Ron Gilbert games, the first and the second.
absolutely. Well, I mean, I told Ron that too, and I've been on Instagram and I've told people this. I'm like, no, dude, it looks great. It's a different style. I know it's different, but it's really imaginative. The colors are great. The style is good. It's a breath of fresh air. I think people should give it a break. I mean, I understand some of the complaints. I'm like, yeah, some things aren't as clear as you'd want them to be or simple, but it has a unique look. And sometimes when you go with a unique look and create something new, you kind of got to break a little rules. So some people want everything to be exactly like, to follow the rules. It's like learning scales versus jazz. I mean, this is jazz. This new Monkey Island is jazz. It's really cool. It's innovative. The guys who were making it did something new and different. And I know in some cases they broke some rules, but that's great. You got to break some rules to be creative. So I'm 100% for it. I think it looks great, and I'm glad to see it. And I've argued with people, and I said, look, each Monkey Island has a different style. That's just the tradition. Nobody set that up, but that just ended up being the tradition. As technology changed, we changed styles with it. And I think also they wanted to go with a lot more. They wanted a lot more expression and animation, and it's expensive. Animation's expensive. On a vampire story, we have a ton of original animation, and that made the budget go through the roof. I mean, there's hardly any reuse of animation. They're almost all unique, which is what I wanted, but that cost a lot of money and that hurt our ability to make a profit. So Ron knows that. Ron knows that you probably shouldn't spend more than $1 million in an adventure game, but I want a lot of animation. I want a lot of character animation. So what can we do? And we want it to look good. We want the characters to have detail and be colorful, and we want the nice squash and stretch. Let's take advantage of modern technology. So he's like, okay, let's use the hinge technology. I don't know what it's called, but the ability where you have different arms and legs and they're a hinge, but they can
Hmm.
squash and stretch and move. So an animator can still use the traditional um, ideas and techniques of a traditional animated movie from Disney or Pixar or Simpsons even, and do it quickly, um, and still be expressive and still look good. But it's not going to be full 3D rotation. It's not
Hmm.
going to be like a cartoon. But now there's a ton of original animation in it that they could whip out really fast. So and then to do that, they had to come up with a style that fits that animation, and they did. They come up with a very colorful style that's very graphic. Um, and it's fun and it fits the subject matter, perfectly. So, I mean, I understand people might like something, you know, similar to Monkey Island 1, where, it's just beautiful Mark Ferrari backgrounds with depth and, atmospheric perspective and, the beautiful lighting and so forth. And you get used to it and that's just your taste. But I think you should also appreciate, what this does. I mean, there's a Disney animated film, it's beautiful, but there's also The Simpsons, which is also still good looking, or Bob's Burgers. They're both good looking movies, just have a different style. So I understand people just have a different taste, but I don't think you can objectively say it's worse at all. If anything, I think it's better because of the different path it took from the previous games. So
Now,
I don't know. I think it's unfair.
Curse
Go
came
ahead.
out in late '97 and was
Hmm.
the last Scum game that LucasArts released. Were you aware at the time that this would be the last Scum game?
Yeah, because they were working on Grim Fandango at the same time, pretty hard, um,
Hmm.
or it started it. And I knew the programmers, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do this new engine. It's gonna be 3D, and we're gonna use the scripting language Lua, and I think Tim wanted that. He wanted the real time 3D, and he wanted to change the interface. That's the cool thing about Tim is he's always experimenting with gameplay and how to interact. And I think that's really cool of him to do. I never do that with my games. I'm always like, let's just stick with what's working and not change it. But Tim, he likes to go ahead and he not just is he creative in how he writes and his ideas, but he's also creative in how it interacts with them, how creativity interacts with an actual computer, and how the player interacts with it. So I thought that was really innovative. I do know Eric Wilmunder told me that he's like, well, they could have used Scum on Grim and 3D. I mean, I programmed it in. You could use Scum in 3D. So I don't know why they didn't use it. So again, when you interview him, you can ask him about that, about 3D and Scum. That's my recollection. I could be wrong. Maybe I remembered incorrectly, but I think that's what he told me.
Maybe if they would have used Scum, then it would have had mouse support on release and not, you know, 17 years later when they released the remastered version.
Oh, so the new version has a mouse support rather
Yeah,
than keyboard? Hmm,
the
I didn't know that.
remastered version of Grim Fandango has mouse support. The original didn't.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I know he wanted to do something simple and like not have an interface at all. He just didn't want anything to pop up. I mean, it was his idea to have the pop-up tattoo in Full Throttle, and I thought that, to me, I think that was the best of the interfaces. I like
Hmm.
the most. I know Sean liked the Sam and Max one, where you click through the icon and it changes. And I have some friends making an adventure game, and they have this new system where you have two options, but it hovers and changes, and you can click on the right mouse. Very similar to the Monkey
The
Island one.
return. Yeah.
Yeah, Return to Monkey Island. It's very similar to that, if not exactly the same as that. So I have some friends who made an adventure game that,
Now, Curse had the same UI as Full Throttle.
Yep.
The coin with the actions is the same as the skull
Yeah,
with
like,
the.
yeah, because Larry, I think, was part of the decision to go with that in Full Throttle, and I think he felt it was probably let's just keep it going, but we'll make it pirate style, So yeah, that's why we had it. I thought it was cool. I think it works for me. I don't have a problem with it. So I mean, I appreciate Grim Fandango trying something new with driving around and then the character looking at things that are interactive. I think that's a really cool idea, but I think it's probably easier just to do point and click, which is probably why they added it. Because people are
And
like, yeah, I don't.
you even had a Grim Fandango reference in Curse of Monkey Island with Manny in Blondebeard's chicken shop.
Yeah, yeah. I think they were trying to recreate the Ask Me About Loom guy in Scum,
Mm-hmm.
which I think was Mike Stemley. Um, the drawing of Mike Stemling. So yeah, I think we did the same thing, except we wanted to do about Grim Fandango. But I think he's part of the puzzle actually, right? Because you get the knife out of his back. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think Guybrush hits him and he falls forward, and you can get the bread knife out. I think it's a bread knife. I forget. I haven't played these games in a long time. So, you know what I should do is I should get my kids and force them to play these games. I'm like, yeah, you need to see what your dad did, guys. Come on.
Wait, they haven't played Curse of Monkey Island?
No, I don't think so. They're usually playing. Well, now they're playing the new Harry Potter game. My oldest daughter went back to World of Warcraft, and my son was big into the Fallout game. He's into every game. He's into every game. My son plays probably by far the most games.
You know what you should do? You should change the Wi-Fi password and then say that the internet isn't working for some reason. And then all you have is the offline copy of The Dig and an offline copy of Curse of Monkey Island.
That's
And
it.
they should
It's the only
play.
game you can play. But
Well,
I do have my computer hooked up to a widescreen TV. So if I want to show something, I can. So I was thinking maybe I should do that. Widescreen TV. Everybody sit around the couch, get some popcorn, and you guys sit around and do what me and my brother did, and we'll solve the puzzles. That way. I was thinking of doing that with my mom too. She's like, I don't play video games. I'm like, well, then you've never seen what I work on. She goes, I've seen pictures. I'm like, that's not the same thing. So people
they
that haven't
should
played.
solve the turtle puzzle. Every time, instead of punishing them, give them the turtle puzzle without telling them about the fossil.
There you go. Yeah, some of those puzzles in the in the dig were again, I think a little harder than I would have designed, but like Sean likes those, and some people do too. I've been told by some people, it's like, well, when you work on a vampire story, make sure you make it hard puzzles. Make sure you have some hard puzzles. I'm like, well, I'll do my best. I just want to make sure they're fair. That's all I say. I hate having unfair puzzles. The infamous monkey wrench puzzle. Yeah,
The monkey wrench puzzle.
yeah,
Yep.
that one
The
drove me
European
nuts.
crowds didn't like it.
They
Me
didn't like it
neither.
either? Okay. Yeah, me neither. Well, I'm pretty sure
Monkey
Ron
wrench,
regrets it.
it's not monkey wrench anywhere in the world except for in the US. Even in the UK, it's not called monkey wrench. So even English speaking people from the UK had no idea how to solve the puzzle.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to that. I remember in Grim Fandango, you fold the balloon into shapes, and one was the shape of a generic guy with a pipe, and it was supposed to be a poet that's popular in America. I forget his name. Was it Walt Whitman? It might not have been Walt Whitman. Anyway, so the puzzle works fine in America, but it doesn't work anywhere else. So the translating people to do the conversions had to find a famous poet from each different country for each version. So when the silhouette popped up, it was somebody that they refer to. And we had the same problem when I did Ghost Pirates. We had a puzzle where you were trying to get somebody to tell you're trying to get a pirate who's big in a pirate slang to tell you something, and if you just asked them using common English, he didn't know what you're talking about. It was like talking to a surfer dude, who used all the slang. But if you used more and more piratey type language and talked more and more like a pirate and had that pirate voice, he would finally ultimately tell you what you needed to use. But I discovered that the R pirate thing isn't popular in all countries, and they didn't quite get that. It's kind of based on that Irish actor's Irish accent that Disney movie, Treasure Island. That's where it comes from. But not everybody, people in Germany had a different actor's voice, and he probably wasn't doing the Irish brogue pirate sound, and so that puzzle did not work, everywhere. So
And you
yeah,
know
you
that the
gotta.
song "A Pirate I Was Meant to Be" from Curse of Monkey Island was only in the English version. They removed it in all the other languages
Oh, really? They didn't just
because
record a
of
new
the
one?
rhymes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, something got to pay attention to. I know that I wanted to do a lot of like signs and written stuff. They go, no, 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 don't do that because if you do that, we'll have to redo the art and translation. I'm like, oh, that's fine, I'll do it. And they're like, no, 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 we don't have time. Don't do it. So no line. But I was like, well, one of the cannons has to say stealth cannon, or it's not going to work. And Jonathan's like, well, if you put every language version of stealth on the side of the cannon, I'll allow it. So that's why one cannon has every language version of stealth on it. I remember asking a French friend of mine, I go, what's French for stealth? And she goes, we don't have a French word for stealth. So I was like, all right, well, give me something close. And then she said fantôme or something. I don't speak French, but she said use that one instead. I'm like, phantom cannon. All right, cool. I don't know if
Now,
it works. I
since
don't know if it translates.
now, since you learned about the production of Grim Fandango during your work on Curse of Monkey Island, then you probably realized that you had to move to 3D art eventually.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Well, we used a lot of 3D in Curse of Monkey Island. We just made it look like cartoon, more 2D, which wasn't, hard to do. So it was cool. It turned out pretty good. Um, but yeah, I knew we were going in 3D. Grim Fandango was doing it, and I thought it was cool, and I was fine with it. You know, um, I myself didn't want to model. I didn't want to do any 3D myself, to do that modeling, but I had no problem doing the texturing or lighting. That's what I liked, and I did a lot of the concept art. So on Indiana Jones. So that was my next game, was a 3D game. And
mhm.
I wanted to work on Indiana Jones because the fact that it was a 3D game, and plus I loved Indiana Jones, and Raiders of the Lost Ark specifically. So yeah, so Curse of Monkey Island came out. It got a lot of great reviews. Then I gave a talk at the GDC. And so my cred was really going up. Nobody ever heard of me before, but then when Curse of Monkey Island came out, and also I talked at the GDC, gave a talk at the GDC. It was pretty popular. Um, and people started to know who I was, so I had a little more cred at the company. So I was able to talk them into doing Indiana Jones. They're like, "Oh, you've done cartoon stuff. You're a cartoon guy." I'm like, "I worked on Dig, Star Wars, guys. I can do Indiana Jones." And but then they're like, "Well, you won all these awards. I'm sure you can do Indiana Jones." I'm like, "Yeah, see, I can do Indiana Jones. No problem." Larry and Jonathan wanted to work on something else. They didn't want to do Monkey Island 3 or 4, which I thought was a mistake. I was like, dude, we should just keep doing Monkey Island 4, but this time, go 3D. And they're like, nah, we want to do something original, because Larry especially wanted to do something original. He definitely loved the fact that Tim Schafer got the ability to come up with new ideas for games, and he wanted that too. So they promised that he could, and he and Jonathan could, after they were done with Monkey Island. So they started working on a game, an adventure game, and but I think what happened was Grim didn't sell as well, and it was really expensive. And I think people were a
Mhm.
little down on adventure games at that point, so they never got to do that game. And then Jonathan and his wife decided to form their own company and left. So that was kind of it. I'm sorry, what was the original question? I just go on tangents sometimes.
Well, since we talked about the move to 3D and you started talking about Indiana
Oh
Jones
yeah,
and the
Indiana
Infernal
Jones.
Machine, so
Yeah, so I wanted to learn it. And we had our lead animator, or one of the animators from Chris Melka was the lead on Indiana Jones, so we were both kind of
mhm.
learning 3D at the time, and he took to it to no problem. That's one thing I noticed is 2D animators, they might not like doing 3D, but once they do it, they take to it like a fish to water. They don't have a problem with that. Disney even at one point was trying to switch all their 2D animators over to 3D once Pixar became really popular, and they say, look, you 2D animators, we're going to give you like a 1 month training course to do 3D, and if you pass it, you can go work on our next movie, which is probably like, I don't know, Chicken Little or something. And all the animators took the training course. They're like, these guys aren't going to do it. They're so old and into what they do, and they're not going to switch to 3D. We'll probably get maybe 30% of these guys back, and it ended up being like 99% of the animators switched to 3D, no problem. They're like, oh, okay, I guess we don't have to hire a bunch of new 3D animators. We can just hire animators, and they can just learn the tools. And so that's the case here. So a lot of the animators that were working on 2D stuff just learned, in the time we had between projects, learned Max, and did a great job with the animation. It wasn't really a problem. Same thing with me and working with level designers, and lighting. It was fun. It was easy to jump into, and I still got to draw. I did a lot of the concept art, and I think we should have done a lot more concept art on Indiana Jones, but that was one of the games where they just wanted you to jump right in because Tomb Raider had already come out and was kind of taking away the whole Indiana Jones vibe away that we
Hmm.
felt was that belongs to George Lucas. You can't just take
Yeah.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, apparently you can, and so we're trying to gain it back. And they just jumped right in, which I thought was a bad idea. I thought we should have done a lot more pre-production and come up with a new engine. We were using the Jedi Knight engine, which had the
Hmm.
advantage of having nice, big, wide open spaces, so we could have these great vistas and big open areas that Tomb Raider couldn't do. But at the same time, it took forever to build those levels. There was nothing snaps to the exact 2 meter thing. So when you're doing like a Raiders of the Lost thing, they made everything very modular so that Lara Croft could jump and automatically hit something or miss. And we had to do that by hand and adjust it because each test, like the edge of this cliff, nope, a little bit farther back, nope. Oh, perfect. It was a pain in the ass. But on the art side, yeah, it was really easy. The only thing I didn't like is we didn't have enough polygons and our effects were terrible because the engine wasn't really designed to do really good effects. And the first Unreal Engine had come out at that time. I was like, can we switch over to Unreal Engine? They're like, no, it costs a lot of money. We're going to save money by using this engine. But this engine's old, you know, and it's taking a long time to make, and the level designers are having a hard time. So, but it was fun. It was fun working with the level designers. We got to be really good friends and had a good time and laughed a lot. I just remember that we all laughed a lot and made a lot of jokes. Working with Hal Barwood, for the most part, was pretty fun. We had a really good chemistry, the whole team. Every once in a while, we would annoy the shit out of Hal, and he would annoy the shit out of us. But 90% of the time, we got along great, and we're friends, and he's fun to talk to. We're both into trivia. We both like science, and we both like nature and national parks and that sort of stuff. So we bonded with that. We clashed on creativity sometimes. One of the funniest creative things too is so I was working with the lead modeler in Indiana Jones on the actual model, and I was like, oh, he looks a little too clean and like a toy that just came out of a box.
Hmm.
Indy's sweaty and he hasn't shaved and he's kind of gross and grimy. So we need to do that, and he's got to have armpit sweat and so forth, and then the back and the front, and there's got to be rips and stuff. So he's got to look a little more grimy because he that's the way he looks in the movies. He's always climbing through stuff or losing a shirt, whatever. And she didn't want to do that. She was like, "No, I want him to look pristine. I just spent all this time making him look pristine." And I remember Hal Barwood came in and was like, "No, we should have it look pristine." I'm like, "No, look at the movie. Here's photographs." And he's like, "All right, but all right, just a little bit. All right, fine." He finally relented on that. So that's things like that. I when I do a licensed product, when I work on a license like a movie or something, I really like to stick to the source material as much as possible because I know that's what people want. They want to feel like they're in the movie. So I want to make sure that they feel like they're in the movie as much as possible and not go down some tangent that, I want to be creative with the license. No, don't be creative with the license. Stay within the license. Do new things within the license, but stay within the license. So that was probably the only
Well,
creative.
you were eventually right because the problem with 90s 3D was that everything was too pristine and clean and not realistic. So you're right, yeah, probably made indie look more realistic than it could have been.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. And then Larry is still working at the company, and Jonathan left, so the new president's like, look, people want a full throttle. You did a Curse of Monkey Island, and after Ron left, Tim Schafer's left, why don't you do full throttle? And Larry's like, not again. All right, fine. I worked on full throttle. I know it really well. I'm going to do some new ideas. So they wanted to make full throttle, full 3D, and focus more on a console game than
Hmm.
necessarily a PC game. So it wouldn't be fully adventure game, and Larry hadn't done much 3D. So that's one of the reasons I did the Indiana Jones game, because I wanted to learn 3D and how to make levels and so forth. I'd seen everybody else be doing it on the Star Wars games and Outlaws, the Outlaw game. I thought Outlaws looked really cool, and I was like, yeah, that looks fun. So I wanted to learn it and then apply it to, maybe a future game, maybe a future Monkey Island. And in fact, I wanted to test that we could make a 3D Monkey Island because I wanted to work on the next one. And so I had our lead animator, our lead modeler, make a 3D Monkey Island based on the Curse of Monkey Island one, just to test it out,
Mm-hmm.
to show Larry. And it's like, it can be done. Because I was thinking of talking him into doing another Monkey Island game before they wanted him to do Full Throttle. But I said, yeah, look, here he is walking around. And it was easy to load him into the game. So we had Guybrush walking around in this Indiana Jones game. And we all thought it was funny. And then one of the programmers goes, hey, it'd be funny if you get in the console and you type in "make me a pirate," Indiana Jones would turn into Indiana Jones. And we thought, oh, that'd be a fun little Easter egg. And then to show Larry also that you could probably make a real-time 3D location, I worked with a level designer, Reed Knight, and he loved Monkey Island. Curse of Monkey Island was his favorite of the Monkey Islands. And I said, hey, can you make the barbershop, using the level design tool? And sure enough, he built it and it looked pretty good. And then he had all the pirate, pictures from the barbershop, the hairstyles that we had in
Mm-hmm.
there. I was like, hey, we should put all our pictures in there. And that'll be a little Easter egg. If everybody worked on the game, we can put our pictures up in there. So we built that, and I showed it to Larry, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this could be, this could work." Um, yeah, as a proof of concept. And then Hal Barwood thought it was funny as hell, and he thought it was great. He's like, "Let's put it in the game. It'll be funny. We'll make it as a Easter egg, and we'll put it in the game." And somebody else, one of the programmers thought it'd be funny if when he shot the bazooka, a rubber chicken would come out,
Mm-hmm.
and then he took some like Super Chicken soundtrack, I think, and was playing that. I don't know if we legally could have had that, but it was like this secret thing. And yeah, so Reed hit it in the final layer of the final level of Indiana Jones, and if you walked around this thing 3 times, it would open up.
Yeah. Now,
And yeah,
when
we
I
put all our
played the
pictures on it.
game, back in 1999, I figured that this 3D model of Guybrush was a preview or a test for Escape from Monkey Island, which was released the following year. But in the
Yeah, it
end,
wasn't.
Guybrush looked vastly different in Escape, and instead of real-time 3D backgrounds, Escape featured pre-rendered 3D backgrounds.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of a test, really, just for adventure games being real-time 3D, using an open world kind of model. And so when Larry got assigned Full Throttle, we just said, "Hey, you can do it the way we did it with Monkey Island, just with Full Throttle." So that'd be real-time 3D. And since Full Throttle has a lot of action oriented in it, we thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to make it real-time 3D. Adventure game, not necessarily, because like I said, that double click to get you out of the room is really quick instead
Mm-hmm.
of having to navigate around. Um, but with Full Throttle, there's going to be a lot of biker combat and a lot of fighting and a lot of action as well as puzzles. So it made sense to do it in 3D. Yeah, I wanted to work on this. It wasn't Escape at the time. I wanted to work on another Monkey Island game, and I had an idea for one. And it's very, this is before The Incredibles came out, but it was basically The Incredibles. So replace Mr. Incredible with Guybrush,
Mm-hmm.
older dude stuck watching the kids. More like Incredibles 2, right? So Guybrush wants to be the hero. He was sort of like Mr. Incredible. He was at home with the kids, while Elaine, arguably the better fighter and the better swashbuckler, was out doing her government, governing job and fighting pirates, and Guybrush was kind of stuck with the kids. And like Incredibles 1, he got lured onto doing an adventure by a voluptuous pirate woman who needed him and thought he was great, and allowed him to be a pirate again. So it was very much like Incredibles. And again, this came out before Incredibles, so I didn't rip off Incredibles. So this was in '99, I think. And yeah, so I came up with an idea. Larry thought it was good. Hal thought it was good. And in the end, it was going to be LeChuck's sister who needed Guybrush's blood to resurrect LeChuck because he's the last guy to have defeated him, and that was part of some voodoo spell that it really needed him. And then I was going to have Guybrush's son sneak on board the ship as a stowaway, and then you would play Guybrush, and sometimes you'd play his son. And if Guybrush got captured, you could play his son who went around and did stuff. And so I pitched that idea. to management, and they liked the idea and they thought I could be creative, but they wanted me to team up with another, like a Jonathan Ackley type, and find somebody who was more programming oriented and more production oriented. So I was, casting about, hey, is anybody, be interested in that? But at the time, both projects that Sean and Mike were working on got canceled. So Mike had been working on a long time on a superhero game that was sort of like Diablo meets I don't know, that one superhero game that came out around that time that was done by Surreal. And Sean was working on an RTS Star Wars game. And both of those games were kind of outside, their wheelhouse. Again, people were trying to do experimental stuff. They weren't doing as many adventure games, so they're starting to do other games. So Mike Stemley really liked DC superheroes, and Sean really liked RTS games. But both of their games got canceled, though the RTS game eventually got resurrected. Um, and so Sean and Mike are like, well, we can do a Monkey Island game. We can go back to, because Curse of Monkey Island sold really well, even though Grim Fandango hadn't sold. It sold well, but it didn't sell as well compared to its budget. So they thought,
Hmm.
well, if we do a Monkey Island game and we use the same technology, we can get it done faster and we'll have a bigger profit. And they were also like, let's not render the game out as detailed as Grim Fandango. Why don't we make it simplified, more toy-like, more cartoony, and then the render times will be a lot quicker and the modeling times will be a lot quicker. And same thing with the character models. Why don't we make them a little more simpler, and that way we could get it done faster, and adventure games can make money. They can make money and we can keep doing them. And that was the thing. A lot of the artists really liked working on adventure games. So they were all on board with doing it as economically as possible, but still have it look good. So that's why Escape from Monkey Island has a little bit different look to it. That's not quite as appealing as maybe some of the previous styles, but some people really like it too. And I know a lot of the artists who worked on it are really good, but I think they were a little more pressed for time on it and couldn't quite, because of the styles change for practical reasons, they couldn't quite put the detail in it that they wanted to, and make it look the way they wanted to. But so Sean and Mike looked at my idea, but they kind of wanted to do their own idea. So I never got to, pitch my idea ultimately. And management was like, well, these guys are experienced and they've worked together before in Sam Max. So, sorry, Bill, they're gonna do it. Maybe you can do something down the road. So that was kind of a bummer for me. But I was working on the Indiana Jones game, so I'm like, nope, I need to focus on the Indiana Jones game and not this other game. But I did have a little influence. I made sure some of the artists that worked on Curse of Monkey Island ended up working on Escape from Monkey Island, so that way there was a little bit of consistency, especially as artist named Kathy Shea. She worked and did a lot of color backgrounds of my drawings in Curse of Monkey Island. I worked with her before, and I worked with her on Indiana Jones. She was a really good artist. So I really pushed for her to be like the lead background artist on, and she did all those really cool maps on Escape from Monkey Island.
And
So
your
I
idea
was really
of Guybrush's kid, you controlling Guybrush's kid and an older Guybrush is something similar to what happens in Return to Monkey Island.
You spoiled it for me. Because I haven't played it fully yet. I've only played like the first half an hour. I have these other.
Well,
I'm
that's
trying
the
to
first
finish.
half an hour. In the
Oh
first
yeah,
half
that's
an
true.
hour,
That's true.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't have spoiled the game
I
for
had the
you.
suspicion. Yeah, that's all right. Um, yeah. What was I gonna say? I forgot what I was gonna say.
Now, after Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine in spring 2000, you started working on a Full Throttle sequel, Full Throttle Payback.
Yeah. So when they assigned it to Larry, I was done with Indiana Jones, and so they gave us some pre-production time to work on Full Throttle. But at the time, there was like a change in the structure of management. And so he and I were working on it pretty closely, coming up with ideas, trying to adhere to how the original game looked, but also make it a PlayStation game so it had a little more action. So I'm sure pure adventure game fans would not have been happy with it, but I think new people to to the IP, to the Full Throttle world would have really dug it, and especially console players. So we're trying to strike the right balance. So we still have puzzles, We still had inventory, but we wanted to have a light RPG element to it and have an open world because, we didn't want you to double click with your motorcycle, from one scene to another. We wanted you to
Hmm.
drive the motorcycle, and there should be a reason to drive a motorcycle, and that's you get into fights with bikers. And then when you got into a fight with a biker, you just didn't do it for fun. You got it so you get experience points or money. Maybe he was a wanted guy, and then you could upgrade your bike so the next fight would be easier. So you could get to this next section and solve some puzzles, and you'd be better at fighting. So we wanted a motorcycle to be a very integral part of Full Throttle. Just like Larry had said, if you're going to be a pirate, you need to do pirate stuff. If you're going to be a biker, you need to do some biker stuff. So we're working on a lot of the ideas for that. So I thought that was coming together pretty well. So there's a shakeup in management. So a new guy came in who was not very LucasArts savvy or knew much about it or kind of fit in. And he was head of the project leaders. And I think a lot of people at first agreed with his management style, but toward the end of his reign, I think a lot of people were like, yeah, he might not have been the best decision. And so we just had a lot of creative differences with this guy. And ultimately, we felt like, yeah, we're not going to be able to make the game that we want to make. I think he wants a more mainstream kind of game, and we want to make something that kind of we felt is the next step for Full Throttle. Um, so, we ultimately just decided, yeah, this isn't the game for us, and we got other game offers, and we'd been there for 8 years, I guess 9 years. Larry had been there for maybe 10 years, and we thought, hey, there's some other games out there. There's some better offers out there. We're not getting to make the game we want, and it seems like the company's just focused on Star Wars. Yeah, maybe it's time to try some other things. So we worked on it for about a year, maybe a little bit less, and I did a lot of concept art on it that I liked and thought was pretty good. And I really liked the story. Though there was some parts that we needed to work out, but I think the plot was pretty good. So you played Ben Throttle after the events of the first Full Throttle, and there was going to be there was going to be a company that bought. I forget what it was. There was going to be another company that was going to
Corley
buy up.
Motors.
It wasn't Corning Motors. It was going to be a company that was bigger that was going to buy up all the roads because they had this new technology, and it was going to replace them with these little hover pads. So there'd be no more roads. And they would be more efficient and better for the environment because there was some sort of environmental apocalypse problem going on in Full Throttle that I think they hinted at. And so you wouldn't need gasoline, and you wouldn't need wheels, So, you can't have that. So that was something that was going to be pushed pretty hard. And Ben, discovered that there was some sort of nefarious stuff going on. So it was his. Um, so he had some information that he felt that the bikers and the truckers needed to know. The truckers didn't like the bikers, and the bikers didn't like the truckers. So there was going to be a big meeting, and Ben had to get to it, and the agents of the company were stopping him because he found something out, and so there's going to be this big meetup, sort of like in that movie The Warriors, where all the gangs got together. I don't know if you saw that movie The Warriors from the
Hmm.
70s. It was some big gang was going to unite all the gangs and control New York. So there's going to be this big meetup between the bikers and the truckers, and yeah, that was basically roughly the plot. And then it would lead to some other things. We wanted to go into a city. You hadn't gone into a Full Throttle city before. We wanted to go into a few other locations, like up in the mountains, which you hadn't done before. But we did want a lot of it to be in the desert, so people still felt like it was related to the first game. So you would still get to drive around in this cool desert. But then we changed some stuff to like it'd be in an underground, humongous labyrinth mine that the cave fish were hiding in, and then you'd get to go into a city, and then there's these mesas filled with rich people that you would have to sneak into. At one point, Ben Throttle was going to have to wear like an Izod shirt and look like a golfer, which we thought would be hilarious. And then, because he'd hate it, he'd hate doing it, but it was the only thing he could do. And then he'd steal a golf cart and do a bunch of biker stuff with a golf cart, and then get back on his bike and be a badass again. So it was going to be a lot of fun. Um, so yeah, and then we had all it's gonna be a lot of driving, a lot of fighting, and then you would get to a place, and then you would explore, and then you would solve puzzles when you were at a different location. So we had like 6 or 7 locations that you could drive to, and get to and have a lot of action in between those, and then you get to the location and you'll be more puzzle solving in that location. So that's how we were trying to balance out action for a console game with adventure game puzzles with its roots. So it didn't feel like a complete 180 going from Full Throttle 1 to Full Throttle 2. There were still puzzle elements, but we focused a little bit on balancing the action. So Full Throttle 1 was mostly puzzles and a little bit of action. This one would be 50-50 puzzles and action. We were hoping that would work out. And we wanted the big open area. We wanted the sandbox area so that there was a reason to drive around, a reason to upgrade your bike, a reason to get better fuel and so forth, and explore areas that were off the road that weren't necessarily part of the puzzle, but were fun to explore. They would just be fun little places that you could get, supplies or find different things for your bike and so forth. So yeah, I thought it was gonna be pretty fun. It was gonna be like, I guess it was gonna be a little bit like Grand Theft Auto
Hmm.
in that way, except Full Throttle, But you would still have one story. You'd have some minor quests or whatever, but it'd still push you toward that one story. So Full Throttle meets GTA was kind of what we were thinking before GTA came out. But more adventure puzzles. I don't think GTA has a lot of inventory puzzles or dialogue puzzles. So it was going to have
So
a lot of that too.
much like all of the adventure game or adventure game based games back then at LucasArts, this was also canceled. Was this the reason why you left LucasArts?
Yeah, well, again, the main reason was it seemed like they were focusing on the prequels. George was doing the prequels, so almost everybody was doing a prequel game. Naboo fighter game, Jedi Power Battles, Obi-Wan Kenobi game. I think there was even another game being done out of house, and the Racer was coming out. Pod Racer. It was called Racer. And I was just like, well, what are we gonna do? I mean, we had a friend who was working on an original game too, at the time, and his game basically got roughly canceled too because it wasn't Star Wars. They made him do Jango Fett Bounty Hunter,
Hmm.
instead of the cool game that he wanted to do, which was an original idea. So there's a lot of old school guys who had done a shitload of Star Wars stuff, and they were like, okay, I'm done Star Wars stuff. Let's do some original new ideas. But it was the wrong time to do it because George and the company wanted everybody to focus on the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and all that. So we're like, is this the place we want to work? Still, it's changed so much. We're not getting to, do the creative, fun stuff, and then me, I always wanted to do an adventure game of my own. I have my own ideas, just like Larry. Um, And when I was on that vacation before Full Throttle, I mean before Curse of Macallan, I was in Disneyland. I brought or Disney World. I brought a sketchbook so I could sketch some stuff. But when I was there, I decided to sketch like an Edward Gorey character. But I thought it'd be fun if the Edward Gorey character was a vampire, and I did it in my cartoon style. And I had a bat companion, and I did all this gothic stuff, and I loved the sketch. And I was like, this would make a good adventure game. So when we left LucasArts, I was like, I think ultimately, if I get a chance, I want to make my own adventure game based on these sketches. And I think Larry too wanted to focus more on writing and not do so much animation and game design. And so I think he got a job at Microsoft for a long time doing game writing. And that's what he does now for a living. He works at Disney and he's a game writer for attractions, Disney attractions at Disney World and all the different parks they have, Shanghai Disney, and he works on different lands and interactive stuff. I think Jonathan Ackley did that for a while too. I don't know if he's doing that anymore. Um, but yeah, we just decided we wanted to focus on different things and like, okay, LucasArts, hey, people want Star Wars games. Go ahead, you should make them, But we want to try something different. So that's basically why we left.
So you went and co-founded your own company.
Yeah, it took a while. I mean, I had the idea and I floated it past fans, and I couldn't pitch it to LucasArts because George had a rule that if you come up with an idea while you're working for him, he owns it, which I didn't like. And I thought that killed creativity because it made people scared to pitch new ideas, right? So
Hmm.
that's one reason um, Tim left, right? He didn't get to own his own ideas. So before he left, he came up with a different game idea that was going to be like a 1960s kung fu spy movie. But I guess that was just kind of a cover for him while he came up with his idea for Psychonauts. So he left to form, his company, Double Fine.
Hmm.
Um, because of that rule, I think he would have, if he could own his own stuff, I think he would have stayed at LucasArts and not form his own company. So I actually worked for Activision Blizzard when I worked on the last Skylanders game, and they had a policy that you could come up with your own game and work on your own game even, but they would have first right of refusal to make the game. So if you made a demo of a game, you'd have to pitch it to them first, and if not, you could pitch it to another company. And I think they even gave you every 2 weeks, you could on Friday, half a day on Friday, you could work on your own game, and they wouldn't mind that. But George wasn't like that, and I think that probably hurt a lot of creativity. So that's why I left. I mean, initially I got lured up to be an art director up to Seattle on Guild Wars, because I'm a big D&D fan and I love fantasy, so I thought it'd be fun to art direct that. But that was up in Seattle. I did like 6 months in Seattle in the winter, and I was like, oh, this is enough. I'm a California dude. I need the sun. I need the Mediterranean like climate. So it was a good game, and the guys are super smart, and I knew their game was going to take off, and they had a lot of good business ideas, like the virtual. I think their idea of the virtual goods, was brilliant, and I hadn't heard it before. So I don't know if they came up with it, but that was the first time I ever heard it. And then Gary Brubaker left LucasArts, got a job at Stormfront, and they had the Lord of the Rings license, and I love Lord of the Rings. I love fantasy. And so I got a job there initially as an environment background artist, but then I eventually got promoted to art director. So it was the Lord of the Rings game was the first game that was based on the movies. So it was EA was a little late in the game when it came to making the Fellowship of the Ring game. So they put all their emphasis on the Two Towers. Lord of the Rings movies had sucked, so EA was like, I don't know about this license. This isn't gonna be good. But then when Peter Jackson showed like the sequence in Balin's tomb, the big old fight with the orcs in Moria, EA suddenly their eyes opened to go, hey, this could be as big as Star Wars. And so this backwater game that Storefront was doing suddenly became this huge, important game to the point where like EA staff actually came up to San Rafael and integrated in with our staff and was there every day, like co-developing the game at the same time. So that was that was a weird situation, but I got to be the art director on that and the background art director on that because I'd worked on a lot of other Indiana Jones and Star Wars games. So they're like, yeah, he knows how to make movie games, and I did the same thing. I was like, they look at the movie, look at the movie as much as possible, look at all the screenshots, look at all the concept art, and just copy that. Just make it look exactly like the game as much as possible. And the programmers did a great job of doing that, setting up the technology so we could do that. And EA came in and they totally agreed with my take on that because that's what they wanted. The original art director wanted to do some creative stuff like put lava in Moria and add crystals with little puffballs coming out of the crystals in Moria, and I was like, dude, there's nothing like that in the movie. Are you sure you want to put that in there? There's no lava. He's like, yeah, there's lava. I go, no, that's fire. It's not lava. Look at the photo. And eventually EA was like, yeah, no, we need to make it look just like the movie. And I poured over photographs and made the game look, the lighting and textures made it look, as much like the movie as possible. And there was a huge team, like 60 people. So I did that for a while, but then I was like, nah, I really want to do my own thing. I really want to do my own thing. But I had kids at the time, and it wasn't easy to do. But luckily, a friend of mine from LucasArts, two of them, went and were working at Midway as third-party art directors. And the cool thing about that is third-party art directors just review games that come in, and or sometimes they fly to the developers, but they just review the games in, give notes, and send them off. And that's not a lot of work. That's not a lot of hard work. I mean, it means you have to have experience and you can help out younger development teams that don't have the experience. But it gave me a lot of time to work on my own ideas. And that was great. So that's when I started working on a vampire story when I was working at Midway. So I was, at nights I would work on a vampire story ideas. And during the day I would, look at the suffering or, a spin-off from Mortal Kombat or the Happy Feet game, and I would give art direction or sketch stuff up and send it to the developers and review the stuff and approve the milestone. And then at night, I had my own office. I could work on my own ideas for games, and Midway didn't care, because they were focused on doing, what I used to call gangster games. They're totally into GTA, so they kept on wanting to do gangster games and R-rated games, which wasn't my thing, but they were paying pretty well, and San Diego is a great place to live. So, but yeah, and then I got my demo together, and after 3 years at Midway, I had a decent demo for a Vampire Story, um, and pitched it around. I first, I did pitch it to Midway, but they were like, "Nah, it's not something we do." I was like, "Yeah, okay, no problem." And but then I talked to some adventure game magazines, the Adventure Gamer, I think. I don't know if it's around anymore, the Adventure, and he wanted to do a full thing on it, the publisher. And Yeah, it got a lot of PR. So I thought, well, if I can get a lot of PR out there, maybe I'll get publishers coming to me, because knocking on the doors of the publisher doesn't seem to be working. But if I get magazine articles about it and show screenshots of it, hopefully they read that stuff and they'll come and knock on my doors. And that's exactly what happened. Um, which is funny. I was talking to the guys at Surreal, and that's how they got BioShock done. Nobody wanted to do BioShock, even though Surreal's all their games are awesome. They didn't want to do BioShock. They pitched BioShock. Nobody cared about it. So they did a bunch of screenshots and a demo, and they showed it to like PC Gamer and all these other game companies, and it got the cover and all this stuff. And then boom, suddenly all these publishers came and wanted to make BioShock, which was dumb. It's an awesome game. They should have done it. So that's kind of what I did too previously to that, and it worked out pretty good. I got into a bidding war, and that was crazy. I didn't thought that would ever happen, but yeah, I got into a bidding war, and I got to quit Midway and sign with Crimson Cow, and we were off to the races. So that was a crazy time. I just it was the fact that I not only did I get to do my own project, I got to run my own company. Got to run my own company. Sometimes be careful what you ask for. So running a business is definitely an added stressor. That's when I started really appreciating the stuff that Tim Schafer had to go through and Brian Moriarty had to go through on the dig. Is like, you don't just have to do the art for the game, you also have to do the dialogue and the game design. I had help with that, and you got to manage the programming. What do I know about programming? And then you got to do taxes and hire the right taxer and lawyers and contracts. Oh, it's so much work. It's so much work, and you know that you're a game developer, so you totally know it, right? You've been
Mm-hmm.
through that. Yeah. So, yeah, that was a lot more work than I thought, and a lot more stress. I guess, that took years off my life too, working on the dig and a Vampire Story. So the big problem at the time was the economy was good, unemployment was really low, and programmers were hard to find. So I had to get programmers where I could, and went to three or four of them on the engine, and it really really made it difficult to balance the budget on that. And we finally got ex-LucasArts guys, Nick Pavis, who had worked on Indiana Jones with me, the N64 version, and worked on that Force Unleashed game.
Mm-hmm.
And he started a new company, and I hired him right away to fix our engine and write our engine. He wasn't cheap, but we got it, and they did an awesome job. And we were able to make Ghost Pirates with that engine too. But the games came out right around 2008, which as you recall, was not a great time to put out a game. So yeah, we didn't have enough money from the revenue of Vampire Story to finish up a Vampire Story 2, which we had started. We were probably about 20%, 25% into a Vampire Story 2 when yeah, we just didn't, the publishers didn't have the money to finish it, and yeah, we didn't have the money either. So that's
But
when we
but you
we had to
did
stop.
start working on a different game.
Yeah, I tried a company in Boston for a year, but they were a game company. No, they were a toy company trying to make a game, so that wasn't a great production. And then Nick Pavis started a company called Monkey Fun. I worked there for about 2 or 3 years, helping them get going, and helped give them some work. And I helped them with a game called Bounty Bots, which is kind of a game idea that me and Hal had worked on when we were doing Indiana Jones. On Indiana Jones, we want to make a multiplayer Indiana Jones. And the only way we could figure out to do that would be if it was kind of like a separate mode, and you'd have multiple people being architects and archaeologists, and you'd go into ruins and you try and run around and gather up as much treasure as possible before a volcano erupted and lava would fill up. And you could set up traps for other players and swing around and knock players over into the lava and that sort of stuff. So it was going to be like a bunch of, it's going to be a free for all in these ruins. And we just didn't have time to do it, and I thought that was a fun idea. And so when I worked at Monkey Fun, I pitched that same idea, and they came back and said, well, why don't we make it the Old West, and we'll have robots, so you can upgrade your robots. So that was the second first-person shooter I worked on. I worked on another one called Suffering at Midway, and that was fun because I got to come up with a whole new style. If you play it, it's on iOS. It's a mobile game, and I don't know if it's available. You might look at the video, and I got to do kind of a more cartoony style. It's not exactly Curse of Monkey Island. It has its own kind of feel. It's a little more simple in its look, but it's still got the whole color theme to it. And you'll probably, when you run around in it, if you play it, you'll get a sense that, yeah, this has a similar feel. But it was a fun game. It has 3 different levels, and you play these cartoon robots running around trying gathering up coins, get them into a bank. But you can be shot by a monkey on a gun, or you can be shot with a freeze ray, or you can be shot with a goo gun. It doesn't kill you. It just slows you down or freezes you, and makes you drop all your coins that somebody else can pick up. And if you get hurt too much, you end up in the repair shop. But after 30 seconds in the repair shop, you come back out. And it's a timed game. So that was really fun to work on. So I'm proud of that game. I don't know if
But
it's still
speaking of
available.
pirate games, you also released Ghost Pirates of Voodoo Island.
Yeah, that was funny. So DDP at the time, I don't think they're around anymore, but DDP wanted to do Vampire Story, but they didn't give me as big a budget or the contract I wanted that Crimson Cow could give me. But they still wanted to do a game with us, so we pitched them. I pitched them a bunch of different games that weren't pirate games. One of them was a game that takes place in the 40s, and you would play actual movie stars from the 40s, but as characters. So it was going to be an adventure game, but you would play Humphrey Bogart, but a cartoon version of Humphrey Bogart in 3D, and he would play like a reporter, and it'd be like kind of a film noir, sci-fi horror game, but then there would be famous people in it, and we were going around trying to get likenesses of people, and even talk to Humphrey Bogart's son and Lauren Bacall's agent, and DDP really liked that, but we also pitched them a sci-fi, retro sci-fi, kind of like a Flash Gordon meets I don't know, detective. It's basically a Flash Gordon detective game that was going to have that kind of retro sci-fi feel from the 50s, those Saturday morning serials. And we pitched that. I really liked that idea a lot because I really wanted to do the artwork for that, rocket ships and flying cars and, jets and jetpacks and so forth. That was going to be a lot of fun. And then at the last minute, we were like, well, maybe we should throw in a pirate game just in case, they want to go a more safer route because of the fact that I worked on Curse of Monkey Island. And lo and behold, that's absolutely one to do. So part of me was like a little disappointed that we didn't get to do something original in a different genre. But the other part of me was like, I had fun working on Curse of Monkey Island. When you work on a game and do the artwork for it, I feel like I'm actually there when I'm doing the artwork. So I get this kind of feel when I'm doing it, and I enjoy doing the pirate games because to me it feels like going on vacation, an adventurous location, and I love doing it. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're just trying to rip off Monkey Island." I'm like, "Not really. I just want to do another Monkey Island game, and I don't own the license, and I really enjoy doing pirates and that sort of thing. I've always liked Pirates of the Caribbean." Um, and I remember talking with Larry about when we were talking about possibly a sequel. I know he was talking with Tim Schafer, and Tim Schafer was lamenting. He's like, "Yeah, I wish we could do games faster. I love working on adventure games, but they take so long to finish. It'd be nice if we could do a short one." And I remember talking to Larry. He's like, "What'd be cool is if you could do um, 3 or 4 shorts and put them into one package." And I think Tim and Larry had even talked about it would be cool if you played multiple characters and they were all sitting in a bar, like LeChuck and Guybrush were talking, it'd be a little bit like Rashomon, where they have different points of view of the same thing happening, and you would play those. And I thought, hey, it would be kind of cool if you did that, that you had three different characters. And it was a lot like Day of the Tentacle. It's like, it would be kind of cool to combine those ideas together and create a pirate game with three new characters, and they have different points of view. And it was sort of like Day of the Tentacle, and that you could switch between the characters, and they could sort of help each other out. They don't have the porta potty, time travel machine, but they could talk to each other, and they all had different expertise, and they could give hints or identify things or solve puzzles by talking to each other. And I always thought it would be cool to be a ghost, because at one point Guybrush was gonna be dead in Curse of Monkey Island, and he was gonna run around as a ghost and do stuff, but they thought that was gonna be too difficult. And so I was like, yeah, I like the idea of the ghost. So I thought it'd be fun to play a ghost part of the game, that you could go into your body, but you could also be ghosts because of a curse. And so yeah, I wanted to do something that was similar to Monkey Island in feel and look, but I didn't want to do Guybrush, and I didn't want to be quite that silly. I wanted to be something a little like Pixar movie, like Incredibles, in that it's
Hmm.
funny, but it's also serious. So we pitched that idea, and they liked it, and we did it. But again, like right toward the end of production, the engine cost so much money, we had to rush and to get it kind of done, and then the economy tanked, and so it became very difficult for the publisher to support the game so that we could polish it. They're like, we kind of need it done, quick, because the economy's dropping, and we need to get this game out as quickly as possible. So I like the game, and I'm proud of it. And I want to go back in and really fix a lot of it, that we had to get out really quickly, and flesh it out. But I really enjoy the characters and the kind of the offshoot spin-off of the Monkey Island world, that's a little more like a Pixar movie and a little less like a farce. That Monkey Island kind of, the territory that Monkey Island is in. And I really liked, I liked what we took a risk in creating more innovative puzzles. I know some people hated some of the puzzles we came up with, but I like the fact that we at least tried to do something different, and create more interesting, or at least a few interesting puzzles that might have been tough for some people, but at least we were trying something new. So I'm proud of that, and I'm happy with most of how it looks, especially the character designs. I think the character designer Jean Louis Sero, he does an awesome job with the characters, and I really enjoyed it, and I think the writing is fun, and I like the voice acting. Voice acting is really good. I think they all did a really good job.
Now, this
I
game
just
also had a spin off, right?
Yeah. So big thing. I just wish I'd had time to polish it more. So when we did kind of a spin-off. Unity had finally come out. So all the nightmare we had spending $250,000 trying to make a game engine from scratch, didn't have to do. There already existed a adventure game on Unity, and so we could just get that one, buy it, and use that. So two of the guys that I'd worked with on a Vampire Story and Ghost Pirates, we formed a company, and we're going to do a series similar to Telltale series. Because I always wanted to do a little, series of games too. With that conversation that Larry had with Tim Schafer, it's like, yeah, it would be fun to do smaller games, but you could do a series of them. So I thought that was a fun idea. And then when Telltale did it and proved that you could do it, I was like, yeah, that works. That it's a good idea. We should do that. And so we signed a deal with a new publisher. They had been a distributor of games, but they hadn't published before. And then we also did a Kickstarter, and yeah, that became successful. I'd done a Kickstarter earlier, but I was kind of a newbie at doing Kickstarter, and I didn't know what I was doing. So this time, we all three researched it and did a much better job with that Kickstarter and figured out how to do that. And we used a bunch of new technology to make things a lot cheaper and faster to do. But we also said, let's keep the game short. That way we can make it polished, because I just felt Ghost Pirates just wasn't as polished. as much as I'd wanted. So I'd rather have a smaller game, shorter game that was much more polished and a lot more fun and more play tested. We play test the shit out of that so that it's fun and the puzzles work and the dialogue's funny. Because sometimes on the bigger games, they're so big, play testing, comes in bits and starts and you don't get as much as you want. Whereas if it's a smaller game, you can really play test it and make sure that it's fun. Um, so, but again, that game came out and didn't do as well because I think the publisher was new to publishing. They've done a few games since. So I think they weren't sure how to market an adventure game. They hadn't done an adventure game before. And plus, we had 5,000 units of pre-sale, with the Kickstarter.
Hmm.
And so I think the majority of the people that wanted to buy the game at the time had already done the Kickstarter. But the publisher was happy with that because it saved them like 40% of the budget. But I think they also hadn't really realized what a Kickstarter was and how it would affect their marketing of the game. And I think, there were times when we had to make some changes for the game for the publisher that the Kickstarter people didn't like. And so I'd go to the publisher and say, look, these guys already paid for the game. We really can't make these changes. And they were like, are you sure? And then we'd go back and forth. And I'd go back to the Kickstarter fans and say, okay, we fixed it. But then the Kickstarter fans would be like, well, we're annoyed, So there was this kind of back and forth where I felt like I was working for two publishers and they had to get along. So, and the publisher wasn't happy about that, but I'm like, well, you're saving 40% of your budget. And sometimes the Kickstarter people weren't happy about that. I'm like, yeah, but we got, twice the budget, so it's going to reflect in the game. It's going to look good. You've already paid for the game, but now we have 60% more to spend on it, so it's going to be better acting. It's going to be more animation. It's going to be better tested. So it was a balancing act. It was interesting. So
So you went your own way to be your own boss, and instead you got two bosses.
yeah, exactly. Well, you always do. You always have a boss. You think you're your own boss, but unless you're a millionaire, you're not really your own boss. You're always working for somebody. Um, so yeah, then the game didn't sell that well. I think it's sold maybe 25,000 units total. So I don't think it's made its money back yet. I talked to the guys recently, and they're still selling it, but I don't think they made that much. I don't think they made any money off of it. But it was one of their first games, so it got really good reviews. It's on Steam. If you go look at it on Steam, it says very positive reviews. So basically, everybody says, "I love it. It's great. Short." So it's too
And
short. I'm like,
and
yeah,
and this wasn't your last Kickstarter. Since then, in 2020, you launched a Kickstarter campaign with Andy Logan for a pop-up mystery adventure board game called Shivers. Can you
yeah,
tell us about
yeah.
the
I did have
project?
a sure, sure. Yeah, there was a gap after we did Duke Grabowski. I did work on the last um, Skylanders game.
Hmm.
And I actually got to design a little toy, so that was pretty awesome. And the funny thing is, when I worked on Skylanders, they hired me right away, and I was like, "Why'd you guys hire me right away?" And the art director said, "Well, Skylanders is based on your style." I'm like, "What?" Yeah, it's basically based on your style from Curse of Monkey Island. I'm like, "Seriously?" He's like, "Yeah." And I looked at their pile of pictures they had for inspiration. Sure enough, there was a shitload of Curse of Monkey Island stuff in there. So I was like, "Wow, a whole franchise art style is inspired." It was inspired by a lot of other things too, but he said essentially we like Curse of Monkey Island and wanted to do that.
Well, it was released 19 years after Monkey Island, so most likely all of the people who played Monkey Island 3 became programmers and designers themselves and used the art style they saw and loved as kids and are using it in their games.
Yeah, 100%. It's totally happening. Every time I see it, I'm like, whoa, look at that. That game had a bigger impact than I thought. It always blows me away that it had a bigger impact. I had a feeling that it was going to have an impact once I did my GDC talk. Larry was invited to do a GDC talk about Chris McGowan, but he was busy and he couldn't do it. So he asked me to do it, and I spent, several weeks working on a presentation. And then we go there, and I think, it's going to be like 30, 40 people there, packed standing room. I was like, what? And my heart's going like crazy. And I was like, thank God I spent 2 to 3 whole weeks going over this presentation over and over again. So it was like, practicing for a play. I just went right through and did it, and it got a great review. In fact, the GDC people were like, please come back and do another talk. And I was like, No way, that scared the shit out of me. Yeah, I did do one, but it was terrible because I didn't have time to do it. And I was like, good, I don't have to do the other one again. I'll just do this one, and it's crappy, and you'll never invite me back, which is what happened. So I'm like, that's why I don't do talks at GDC. It's just nerve-wracking to get up in front of people. Um, but yeah, so out of the blue, yeah, he was a fan of Kirsten McGowan, Andy, and asked me if I could do horror. I'm like, well, did you see my Vampire Story game? And he said no, and I sent him a copy. He's like, yeah, this is exactly what we want, for the game. I think that's how it happened. But or I showed him pictures of course, Vampire Story. I don't know if he played it, but I definitely showed him videos. And yeah, so he told me what he was doing, and he showed me this cool white paper cutouts that he had done. This guy makes products. He designs products and makes them cool looking, designs them, to be stylistic. And so he runs his own company, and he's really good. And he's artistic too. He knows how to draw and do stuff, create stuff artistically and sculpt, sculpt in paper anyway. And he's really good at engineering too. So he would dissect all these pop-up books and pop-up cards. And he had played, I think it's Betrayal on Haunted Hill. I think it's a pretty popular board game where it has like
Mhm.
50 different scenarios in it. But he felt it wasn't appealing enough to children, but it was too complex. And so he wanted something simpler. So he kind of came up with his own idea. And it's very much like an adventure game. So you have rooms just like you do in an adventure game, and you're supposed to explore them like an adventure game, and you're supposed to open things and find inventory, and then you use that to help solve puzzles and defeat bad guys. And there's a different scenario. There's tons of different scenarios. So he showed me this paper cutout stuff and asked me to do designs for it, and I said, yeah, absolutely, this is totally fun. I've always wanted to do a board game, a big role-playing game player and a board game player. Um, and so I was totally excited to do it, and I thought it was innovative that it's these rooms pop up and you prop them open, and you have characters in them. So I thought that was a very fun game idea. And the one thing I wanted to do though is I didn't want to paint things. I didn't want to just paint and texture things like you would a 3D model. So with a 3D model, if you're going to do a floor, you just paint a wood grain. You don't deal with the lighting or anything else about it or shading. You just paint the flat texture as if it's fully lit. And I was like, I'd like to try something different where I actually paint in the light source and it radiates out, and we have cast shadows and so forth on the actual um, 3D pop-up. And he was like, okay, yeah, let's try that. And I think it works pretty good. I don't have an example of it around here. Yeah, I think it worked out pretty good. So we had a fire in a fireplace, and the light would you know, um, spread out in this orange color, and then we'd have cool blues in the shadows, just like I did with a Vampire Story or Curse of McGowan. And I did, the kind of a Vampire Story, Curse of McGowan style with it, exaggerated, cartoony stuff. And I think it went something more realistic, but I was like, yeah, I don't really do that. I mean, I can. Occasionally, I've done, more realistic stuff, but uh, I don't like it as much, and I don't think it turns out as well. I think people prefer my Vampire Story, or Chris McCallan style, and I think that's best for this. And so I was like, all right, so things are a little warped and cartoony, but still rendered and painted, and lit and shaded, just like it would in any adventure game. And I think it turned out really well. I'm just hoping he can get it into the COVID slowed it down, and then slowed it down a lot because half the game was built in one Chinese city and the other half was built in the other Chinese city, and that Chinese city was locked down completely. So like for 3 or 4 months, half the game was built and the other half wasn't. So it took about 8 months longer to make than we would have wanted to. But when it came out, I thought it was really good. And if you're an adventure game fan, this is perfect, and you can actually make your own game with it too if you want. So it has blank sheets that you can use and make your own kind of games with it, and it's got 5, 6 different really cool locations. And Larry Ahern actually wrote a bunch of the scenarios too, because he's a writer now, and he wrote some really crazy scenarios that are really out there because Larry likes avant-garde kind of unusual stuff. So if you play that game, there'll be some traditional stuff and then one really odd one, and that's Larry's design, a little quirky. Um, and hid some Monkey Island stuff in the game. I think you can see a skull of Murray in there. And one of the scenario booklets you get is supposed to be a flea circus. I use the exact same circus from Monkey Island 1, except I put fleas in it. So, and there's a guy climbing into the cannon. He's actually got the bucket on his head, too, from
Cool.
the Scum Bar.
Just
So
don't
if you
tell
see that,
Disney.
yeah, I think you can get away with it as long as it's like an homage and it's different, So it's quite a bit different, enough, but it's also close enough that people will get it. Murray, it pretty much looks like Murray, but it is kind of a skull, so he's not very distinctive. So I let Andy worry about that. That's his company. He's
It's
got his
fine.
lawyers. He
It's
can deal
fine.
with it. So yeah.
Now, before we conclude our conversation, I have a few questions from our viewers.
Oh, sure.
Mata John asks, what was the inspiration for the alien species looks and that of the alien world in The Dig?
Yeah, so I think I talked about the alien world in that Brian and wanted to go in a completely opposite direction from the previous dig. In that the previous dig looked very Star Warsy like and a little bit like Alien. So it had Ron Cobb spaceships, but then had tons of jungle world and swamps and that sort of stuff. So Brian wanted to do something completely different. So we made a water world. So he and Billy came up with a water world with these pinnacles, because it's supposed to be kind of like a holy site, because the Cocytans had created this technology. It was going to take you to heaven, but it turned out to be hell. So that was kind of the look. And like I said, Bill's like, it's just going to be all rocks, no plants. I actually did one layer where there was plants. I did put one background with plants in it. Just for fun, to make Billy happy. See, we got some plants in there. And that's when he came up with the dynamic lighting, the real dramatic lighting and the bright colors for that look. Oh, I do have one side story about the dig. So the first dig, Noah's dig, was very looked great. Did a ton of artwork for it. And when it got canceled, everybody was heartbroken about it. But a bunch of people, I think Anson and Billykin and maybe Larry, but you might have to ask him, came up with the idea that, hey, let's keep the art, but let's make it a Star Wars adventure game, and instead of a bunch of astronauts, just make it Boba Fett, and he's running around and he's trying to hunt down this guy on this alien planet, and you have to solve puzzles. That's Boba Fett.
This could have been an
And
awesome game.
I agree, but I heard that marketing or maybe management at the time, this was before Jack Sorensen's time, said, Boba Fett's a minor character. He's not that popular. Nobody will want to buy that.
Yeah. Tell that to the creators of Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, exactly. And Mandalorian is basically Boba Fett too.
Yep.
So, and we made a couple Boba Fett games. So I thought that was ridiculous. So the character design for the Cocytans was originally the Cocytans. I don't know if they were called Cocytans, but originally aliens. Brian wanted them to look like lions with wings, and I was like, that's not very. It's not very alien-like. But he's like, well, no, there's some symbology to it, and it's related back to some ancient stuff that I don't even remember what it is, but apparently the lion with wings is some sort of imagery that's very popular or significant, to ancient cultures. And he wanted it to seem like the aliens had come to Earth, very much like Prometheus had come to Earth and taught humanity how to do shit, and then ancient alien ideas, and so we didn't really like that. So when we did the second one with Sean, or third one with Sean, we wanted something more alien-like. So I worked with Peter Chan on it, and yeah, we wanted something that was appealing but alien at the same time. And then Peter wanted something that was a little more wizened looking and wise, because these guys are supposed to be ancient and have a lot of knowledge. And we were big fans of this book by Barlow called Expedition, and it had a lot of weird aliens in it. So it was kind of a combination of what we were looking for. And Peter Chan did the final design, and I think there were some rough sketches I did. It was mostly just communicating with him what we wanted. And so if you look at the book Expedition, last name of the artist is Barlow, and it's really cool. And all the aliens have different types of locomotion, and none of them have eyes, and they have little glowy dots all over them, and they're very, it's very alien. It's the most alien I've seen of of any like designs, and so that was kind of the inspiration for those guys. So we wanted them to look appealing, we wanted them to look wise, but at the same time, we wanted them to look like nothing you ever seen before, but also clearly functional, and definitely had hands, so they had the technology. So we kind of a little bit alien, a little bit human, a little bit, old, wise, old monk, and also kind of appealing, a million characteristics. So that's
Okay.
that's how we came up with it.
Michael Clamorous asks, how was it making 2D adventure games during a period in which adventure games were dead?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we had to fight against that idea that they were dead because occasionally an adventure game would do well, and make a lot of money. A Broken Sword, I think was a big one, and Longest Journey and Siberia. The games did sell, mostly in Europe. So yeah, it was a little tough. Whenever you'd pitch one, people were like, no, it's not a first-person shooter. It's not, Grand Theft Auto. It's just, I understand that it's expensive to make a venture game because a lot of things are not replayable. They're replayable because you enjoy it. But if you make a level in Indiana Jones, a lot of the elements you make in there, you could easily make another level with that. Whereas adventure game, you do the backgrounds, you model it, and that's it. You can't, like the office and Grim Fandango, you use it just for that office. You can't really use it for, the bar or the
Mm-hmm.
the the hospital or whatever. And so it's expensive to do that. And so it was kind of tough, but there was definitely a dedicated fan base, and we knew that if we could capture the feel of what they wanted and come in under a certain budget, it should make money. It should do well. We just didn't count on credit default swaps, you know, going under. And I think a Vampire Story 1 would have made a lot more money at the time. I think it now has made its money back for sure, and sold over 100,000 units. And it's still selling. Not a ton, but it's still selling. So, yeah, that's the other thing I said too is like you probably should make more than one adventure game. If you're gonna make adventure games, you probably should make 3 or 4, and that way you get revenue streams from all of them, and they're sort of evergreen products in that they make money every year and they don't necessarily age. If you paint your backgrounds, the painting looks good 2008 as it does in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the models don't look quite as good, obviously, but the rest of the game looks great. It doesn't age, and if people like that kind of genre, or vampires or pirates, they'll pick it up. Those are popular genres. So
True.
it was a little disheartening, but we knew that we knew the fan base existed, and we were going to make a game for them. So I guess people really liked my art and thought, yeah, this game should sell. When they looked at the art, they're like, oh yeah, this game will sell great. So we were able to convince people to do it based on our demo and just the concept art alone. So we were lucky in that respect. So yeah, but it was definitely difficult. Some people are like, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you go work on a first-person shooter?" It's like I have, but it's not as fun, And there's so many out there. There's so many out there, you know. Adventure games allow for more creativity, whereas like I think first-person shooters they do allow for creativity, but just not many people get to do it, and I think if you get too creative with a first person shooter, I worked at Midway, people would get, the management would get a little scared. They want it to seem they'd feel safer if a game was like something that they knew and already made money. So it kind of squashed creativity a little bit. Where the adventure games, not necessarily. Obviously doing pirate games, people felt that was safe, which is why we did Ghost Pirates. That's why that publisher wanted us to do Ghost Pirates. But you could do original ideas. If you had good art and good story, people were more likely to do an adventure game than, let's say, an original first-person shooter. So
Okay.
I don't know if that
Ja-
answered his question.
yeah.
Hopefully that was close.
Jared asks, if Vampire Story 2 is successful, will you consider making a sequel to Ghost Pirates of Vuju Island and maybe even add Duke Grabowski to the game?
Okay, so Vampire Story 2. Right now, we are making a demo for Vampire Story 2. It's coming along using new technology, and I think it looks great. And we're using an adventure game engine that has already existed and made adventure games. So we're changing the interface a little bit, so it's actually closer to the Return to Monkey Island interface. So a few things are going to change. We're not going to quite have the pop-up, Gothic cross popping up. So we don't have full financing on it right now. We're just doing it out of our own private time, and when we have time to work on it. But we're hoping by this summer the demo will be done and we'll be able to um, market the game or pitch the game to publishers. We're not done with pre-production, so we're going to need help raising money for pre-production. And then once pre-production is done, we will go into pitching the game to publishers and hopefully get that done. So if the game has almost all its pre-production done, it's more likely to be picked up by a publisher. So we're going to try and do as much self-funding as possible. So, talking about making adventure games, that's kind of the world we're in now. It's like if you can fund it as much and do as much of it yourself as possible, which is true for a bunch of games, um, you're more likely to get a publisher because they take less and less risks. So the idea is make it less risky for the publishers as possible, and that's kind of what we're doing right now. So
And if
yeah,
the
I'd love to do
game if the game is successful, will you work on sequel to Ghost Pirates of Vuju Island?
Yeah. Well, we designed Ghost Pirates 2 already, but we hadn't, done much work on it. And I'd love to do that, and I think that would be great. And Duke Grabowski had designed all 5 episodes, roughly, in the second episode completely. And that's probably more likely to happen because it's less money. So I would say at Duke Grabowski episode 2, because it was supposed to be a series, we planned it out as a series, is more likely because I think it'll be much less work to do these little tiny episodes and release them, make money off those, and they can help fund this next episode, so forth. So I think that's more likely than a big Ghost Pirates thing. So, but yeah, I wouldn't have a problem since they take place in the same world, the Azurean, as I call it. Yeah, I think in the future you could, but I don't. I think Ghost Pirates 2 doesn't have a need to put Duke in it, but Ghost Pirates 3, sure, yeah, that would be a good idea. If we did the Duke 1 and then we did Ghost Pirates 2, then yeah, I could see them coming together. They're in the same world, so they're in the same sea, so that would be fun. So I'd love to do it, but right now their stories don't overlap.
Okay. Jan Hofmeister, aka Laser Schward, asks, can you give us some insights about the creation of the cover artwork of Curse of Monkey Island?
Yeah, so we tried a bunch of different versions. I think the overall layout was Larry Ahern's idea, and it's his final drawing, but we weren't sure exactly how we wanted to do it. So Monkey Island 1 took the background was sort of a collage, but it takes place mostly in the day, and then you got that great cover from Monkey Island 2 that takes place at night. And so we were like, well, let's split the difference. Let's do it in sunset, twilight. And so that's where we came up with that idea. And I was like, well, we need it to be kind of dark because we need LeChuck's demon beard to stand out, but we don't want to do an exact nighttime one too. And so, but Larry wanted to encapsulate what the story was in Quest really quick. Like Guybrush wants to marry Elaine. Elaine is a gold statue. LeChuck's standing in the way, and Guybrush has to struggle to save Elaine and take on LeChuck, who's about ready to kill him. So that's what Larry wanted to do, and he drew that, and I drew the curly Q clouds. And I remember at the time it was going to be really high res, and I hadn't really done a high res thing before, so we had to upgrade my computer to actually handle, how large it was going to be, 300 DPI. Now, it's laughable now, but at the time it was a bit of a challenge. But
Jan,
yeah.
who asked that question, is currently working on upscales of those classic LucasArts covers, including Curse of Monkey Island. So if you want a high resolution upscale of that cover, he created
that would
one.
totally be cool. Because all the games that LucasArts made, the teams got posters, and for some reason we didn't get a poster. We got like a big box that recreated the box that it came in, but it was like this big, this big.
I want it.
We didn't get a poster. Yeah, and then we didn't get one for the dig either. We didn't get a poster for the dig, so I was a little
Well, you
annoyed.
can
So
print
I'd
out
love
the
to get
poster
that.
from Jan's upscales.
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, I could be wrong on that. Maybe there was a poster made, but I don't think I got it. I mean, I definitely got the box, but I didn't get that. So anyway, yeah, I'd love to get it. That would be awesome to print up one and frame it and actually put it in my new office.
Okay. Sai Mistache asks, what was your most memorable experience while working at LucasArts?
Most memorable. Well, having George Lucas come down and look at my live action video Star Wars footage, that was pretty memorable, even though I didn't get to go in the room. I'm still bitter about that. That was pretty cool. Um, we had a really fun rap party for Full Throttle too. That was fun because we went to an actual bar and the band who did the music was playing, and it was a great time. And we got to slam dance, so that was a lot of fun. Um, Anytime I got the chance to go up to the ranch and go up to the main house and go to the library there, that was pretty awesome too. But favorite events at LucasArts, most memorable. Doing that GDC talk was pretty memorable, I'd say, because I was so dang nervous on that. We had some really good parties. George Lucas went to the nth degree to have a good Christmas party, so a lot of those Christmas parties were pretty fun. Um, but probably my favorite memories would be the very beginning of Cruise Monkey Island when it was just four guys. Well, we had programmers too, actually. It was six guys. But four of us were sitting in a small office and we were brainstorming all the ideas and the layouts and the art and the storyboards and the story and the script. Larry and Jonathan had done the preliminary, but it was me, Mark Overney, who was the lead animator, and Larry and Jonathan, and we were just have a lot of fun storyboarding stuff, putting it on, talking about ideas. Me pushing for jokes that were inappropriate, and then Jonathan saying, "No, that's not appropriate," and then Larry coming with funny gags, and Mark, doing more visual gags with the storyboards. Very good storyboard artist, and just hanging out there, having that whole office to ourselves, just having a good time, coming up with funny ideas. That's probably the most fun I've had. I also took over that office too when I wanted to do artwork because we had kind of an open studio, but I wanted some quiet. So oftentimes I'd take over that studio and draw in there. It was nice and quiet and I could focus. I think that was when I was most productive, when I was in that small office. It was, I could close the door and just put on my headphones and listen to a book and draw. Work on the different designs for each one, draw, then work on another design and draw. So I think that was the most fun. I mean, I think it comes out in the game. That Crystal Monkey was the funnest game to make so far. Um, I think that shows. I think that's why I came
That's
indoors. I think we all had a lot of fun, and yeah, that might be one of the reasons.
now, and one last question from me. What are
Sure.
your plans for 2023 and how can people stay in touch with you?
Well, you can always email me, BillTaylor@gmail. That's pretty simple. Just BillTaylor@gmail. I don't always get back to everybody all the time. Just sometimes I'm busy and sometimes I just flake. But generally, I try to. I do have an Instagram. I try and post on that once in a while. I was posting like every day for a while, but then I got busy and had to move to a new house and stuff. And so now I'm trying to get back into it. Um, yeah, so you can get a hold of me that way. Um, you can look at my portfolio of a lot of the other games I worked on called at BillTillerArt.com. I think it was called BillTillerArt.com. So you can check out a lot of the old stuff. It's not necessarily some of my new stuff. It's just, some of the older stuff. I don't think there's a lot of Curse Monkey on stuff in there because it's I think it's lower res, and I think people want to see more of the higher res stuff, which is one of the reasons I was repainting one of the Barbary Coast. Is I thought I want to show off the Curse of Monkey stuff I've done, but it's lower res, and I think people looking at it will be like, it's old stuff. And so I'm like, well, it's basically the same art, but it's higher res. So what I plan to do this year, two things. I'm focusing on. I will work on the expansion pack for the Shivers, but it's only 3 rooms, so it's not a lot of work. And I'm getting into children's book. I wrote and did artwork for a children's book, and right now I'm pitching it to I'm going to be pitching to publishers pretty soon. I got a few more sketches to clean up, and then I'm going to pitch it to publishers. It's called Scary Mary and Her Monster Mess. It's about a little girl who wants to have some more monster-oriented friends or gothic friends, and she decides to summon them from a book, but then they get a little out of hand. So it's got a a vampire story slash Curse of Monkey Island feel to it, but takes place in the suburbs. So I've done the 3 paintings for it, and I've just done sketches on it, and then I'm going to pitch it to publishers, and we'll see how that goes. And I'm also working with another woman on a children's book too. Can't really talk about that one, but it's much smaller. It's for smaller, younger kids, and it's much more simple. It's more like a little more like Hello Moon or Goodnight Moon, excuse me. And then working on the demo for Vampire Story 2. I'm done basically with all the art I have to do. So right now it's animators doing the animation. Again, we're using a new system for the animation, and so that's going really well. It's going to be mostly scripted animation. So that's one way to keep the costs down is we don't have as many unique animations, but we use generic animations, but we can make new combinations with them, similar to what Telltale did, with Simon Max. And that's going to save a lot of time and allow us to do a lot more animation. And we're simplifying the interface, so the less dialogue to record. I think one of the mistakes I made on Vampire Story 2 is just way too many interactive areas, so we're just going to trim that down. Way too much dialogue. I think we're going to make that more manageable. And that's it. Those are my focuses: the children's book idea that I'm doing, and a Vampire Story 2 demo. So that's a big thing, and the Shivers expansion pack. So that's it. That's pretty much what I'm focusing on right now. But I'd love to do a special edition. I'd love to do a special edition of Curse of Monkey Island, where I got to repaint all the backgrounds. So LucasArts, if you're ever doing a special edition of Curse of Monkey Island, let me know, because I am
You heard it here
willing and
first,
ready.
people. If there
Yeah,
is ever a remaster of Curse of Monkey Island, Bill Tiller
I'd love
wants
to
to
do it.
be part of it.
Yeah, and if they want to do another Monkey Island, and Ron doesn't, hey, contact Jonathan, Larry, and myself, and we're probably available to do it. So that would be fun to do. I don't know. Ron's probably wanting to do all the rest from now on. Now that LucasArts is working with him again, I'm sure he's going to end up doing the follow-ups. But if he didn't want to do it, it'd be fun to do another one.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for taking the time to join me in this conversation. It's been really fun chatting with you today. Wow, so there you have it, folks. That was my very lengthy conversation with Bill Tiller. If you enjoyed this conversation and wish to support the channel, feel free to join us on Patreon or donate via Ko-fi. Links are in the description. Anyway, stay tuned for my next conversation with LucasArts legend Noah Falstein, which will be released in the next couple of weeks. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!